I'm pregnant by your husband. After learning of her husband and sister's betrayal, Jennifer left for the country. And barely. Jennifer was just leaving the clinic when she got a call from her younger sister. "Hi, what are you doing?" Her sister's voice vibrated with joy, which was very audible even over the phone. "I just got off work," Jennifer replied tiredly. "I'm getting off work. I'm going to drive home and sleep it off." "Listen, sister, Maggie said. It's the same thing every day. Aren't you tired of living such a boring life yourself?" Jennifer gritted her teeth to keep herself from saying something sarcastic to Maggie. No, she'd always been able to keep her temper in check with her younger sister. But lately, apparently because of the increased workload and the unstable family situation, Jennifer was beginning to feel her nerves fraying. "Aren't you tired of telling me the same thing every time?" she said. Jennifer got into the car and switched on the ignition. She wanted to go home, have a cup of tea, take a bath, and then crawl into bed with a blanket over her head. "Well, I'm sorry," Maggie said in a softer voice now. "No offense. I just wanted to ask you something." "I didn't even doubt it," Jennifer thought to herself with annoyance. Then she turned on the car's heater. It was the middle of October outside. By 7 p.m., it was very dark outside, and it was also very cold, which was not conducive to a better mood and the desire to do anything but relax. "Did you ask me not to drag this out?" Jennifer said. "More money?" Maggie clucked her tongue. "I haven't asked you for money in a long time." "What are you saying to me, Jen?" "No, I wanted to ask you for your suitcase. Can you lend it to me for about a week? Well, 10 days tops." "Are you going somewhere?" asked the older sister, more out of politeness than genuine interest. "Yes, I'm going to the sea." Maggie answered cheerfully. "Unlike you, my plans are not all about work and home. You're the one who has always lived a boring and proper life." Jennifer remained silent. Indeed, she had always tried to live right. But did it really look boring from the outside? Perhaps for a 23-year-old girl, life between home and work does seem gray and dull. But that was Jennifer's life before marriage. Maybe she really is living life the wrong way. Von Bridget is constantly traveling somewhere and manages to work, and her personal life is boiling. And Jennifer, right after graduation, got married, got a job at the clinic, and since then in her life almost nothing has happened. Early rise in the morning, then the road to work, then the reception of patients from morning to lunch, in the afternoon work with documents or visits to patients at home. Even on weekends, Jennifer managed to work in a private clinic. When she was on holiday, she either went on training courses or spent time at seminars and conferences. For her almost 30 years of life, she has never been to the sea, did not fly on a plane on holiday, did not buy herself a beautiful swimming costume. I guess her life really was boring and dull. Line. Maggie even giggled into the phone. "Can you hear me? I need a suitcase." "You're always going on holiday," Jennifer replied, distracted from her sad thoughts. "Don't you have a suitcase?" Can you believe it? Maggie kept talking into the phone, unable to get a word in edgewise. "On my last trip, my suitcase was dropped when I was reloading my luggage. It cracked, and I haven't been able to buy a new one since." You bet, Jennifer thought to herself, sighing and listening to the complaining speech. You go to resorts several times a year. You don't even have time to buy a suitcase between trips. And then she suddenly regretted it and scolded herself for being too hard on her younger sister. After all, it wasn't Maggie's fault that Jennifer preferred work to leisure and could afford regular trips to the sea. "When can I come to your place to pick up my suitcase?" Maggie asked, again forcing Jennifer to switch her thoughts. "You can come whenever you want to come." "Tomorrow," said her sister cheerfully. "I don't suppose you're in any condition to receive guests today?" "Yes, tomorrow afternoon would be better. Tomorrow's Saturday. I'll be seeing patients at the clinic until 3, so come after 3. "That's fine. Thank you." The nurse chirped something else into the phone, musing about how her trip was going so well. Autumn was setting in outside. She'd be going to some hot country, splashing in the warm sea, and she wouldn't have to freeze in the city until the heating came back on. Jennifer got home at about 8 o'clock. She entered the empty flat, found the light switch in the hallway by feel, and switched on the light. She sat down on the banquette by the entrance, stretched her legs out. She sighed heavily. How lonely it was on nights like this, when Winston was late at work and Jennifer had to return to the empty, dark flat. How many times she'd wanted a cat or a dog, but then she'd talked herself out of it because she realized that, because she and her husband were always busy at work, it would be hard for the poor creature to sit alone and cooped up for long hours. She took her phone out of her coat pocket. Jennifer dialed Winston's number. She didn't expect her husband to answer immediately, or that he would answer her call at all. Sure enough, the phone rang with long beeps, and her husband never answered. After preparing a quick dinner and taking a shower, Jennifer looked longingly at her mobile phone screen. Her husband never called back or even texted. Jennifer, trained by life experience, realized that it was useless to wait for a call from her eternally busy spouse. Winston, the head of the department at the regional hospital, was busy 24 hours a day. He could have an emergency operation, some urgent concilium that required his obligatory participation. There could have been a meeting. All in all, Jennifer had long since become accustomed to the fact that her husband was a very busy man. She didn't work and didn't voice her opinion on the matter. Already falling asleep in bed after a hot shower and dinner, Jennifer heard the phone ring. It was Winston calling. "I'm just leaving work." Jennifer jumped up sharply in bed and looked at the wall clock. It was past 11 o'clock in the evening. She hadn't noticed herself falling into slumber. "I'm waiting for you. Shall I heat up dinner?" Jennifer asked. "No need. I had a snack at work. We had a meeting. Everyone was hungry by then, so we decided we'd order pizza. Anyway, I've eaten so I don't have to bother reheating the food." Jennifer breathed a sigh of relief. By the time her husband arrived home, she had a headache. So after waiting for Winston, she immediately fell asleep, not really knowing what the head of the department was so late for. In the morning, when she awoke, she found her husband no longer at home. Hopelessness, longing came over Jennifer. She ate breakfast and stared out the window alone. Then she started to get ready for her part-time job at a private clinic. For more than 5 years, Jennifer had been working as a general practitioner at the city's polyclinic, while managing patients at private clinics. She enjoyed her work, especially when she saw the results of her labor and heard the words of gratitude from her patients. Everything was going well in her work. And even despite all the difficulties, Jennifer always came out of work satisfied with herself and the results of her work. As for her personal life, then everything was not as simple as we would like. Jennifer's husband, Winston Kudryashov, was older than his wife for 20 years, and for 15 years he had been the head of a department at the regional hospital. As a specialist, Winston enjoyed high prestige, had behind his back a huge professional experience, thousands of grateful patients, and a lot of awards. Jennifer felt like a girl next to him, and given the difference in age, experience in both professional and life, the young wife only had to listen to the opinion of her wise husband. "Why are you marrying such an old man?" Jennifer was asked by her mate Maggie. "Is it a duty? Winston is almost 45, he's older than you, and he's older than you, and he's a doctor. So you'll be in constant competition. He's bound to always be better than you." "He is the best for me," Jennifer replied with a smile. "I love this man very much. You have no idea how strong my feelings for him are." She was 24 years old at the time. She was in her final year of medical school, and Winston, in her eyes, was a medical guru. Jennifer even then looked into the mouth of her future husband, listened to his advice, listened to stories from practice, and believed that fate has made her a real gift in the form of meeting and mutual sympathy with such an intelligent, beautiful, and very responsive man. They met when Jennifer was 20 years old. Winston had already turned 40. She was in her 3rd year of university, and he was consulting teachers at the university and lectured for a while on obstetrics and gynecology. Jennifer met Winston in the library. He was just dictating to one of the students a list of literature required for the course. Jennifer went there to prepare for the seminar. "Young lady, you're wasting your time in this library," Winston addressed her when she asked the librarian to look for an ophthalmology textbook for her. "Why wasted? Jennifer looked up in surprise at the man she had often met in the walls of her university. Winston did not lecture at them, but the girl had seen his picture in the hall and knew exactly who he was. Because the university's library is sparse on teaching materials. In terms of terminology, I advise you to buy your textbooks from a bookstore. Or better yet, order them online, Winston replied. That's a strange suggestion from you, Jennifer grinned. Usually our library gets all the praise, and you say the exact opposite. I just always tell the truth, Winston said. Winston grinned, then winked at the librarian. And don't look at me like that, Rachel. Am I wrong? Your library's been short on manuals for a long time, he said. You're right, Winston, she sighed. Jennifer took a couple of textbooks. As she left the library, she ran into Winston again. Will you take my advice? He asked. Jennifer looked at Winston in surprise. What kind of advice? Go to the shop or order online? Well, going to the shop and choosing the textbook you want would be faster. While you're waiting for the online order, it might not be relevant to you. Jennifer shrugged her shoulders. Well, I'll go to the bookshop then. Can I give you a lift? Jennifer was taken aback. She had never once spoken to this man. She hadn't even paid attention to him, thinking he was too experienced and not interested in talking to young female students. Winston's question, however, confused her. She looked at him incredulously, then nodded suddenly. Okay, bring me in. From that day on, communication began between them. At first it was just idle chatter, not so much about medicine, but about the lives of students and faculty, Jennifer's childhood and Winston's adolescence. It turned out that the man had been married once. My ex-wife herself filed for divorce because of eternal employment, and I did not keep around a woman who was far from medicine and considered my work frivolous, said Winston. She was not ready to wait for me in the evenings and wanted me to socialize with other women, jealous of them and of my work too. But as a gynecologist, how could I restrict myself from socializing with the female sex? It's my job, my duty, my life, after all. And then I realized that I could only live with a woman who, like me, has something to do with medicine, who would be sympathetic to my late returns and would not make hysterics and scandals about it. Is that so much to ask, Jennifer? Winston asked. Jennifer shook her head at the sound of her name in Winston's mouth. Goosebumps ran down her spine. She looked at the man differently now. In him, Jennifer saw a kindred spirit, someone close to her in spirit. Even more so. The thought that she could become a doctor and even his wife in the future made her sweetly dizzy. In the meantime, their relationship had moved to a new level, and now Jennifer often stayed overnight in Winston's flat. She felt relaxed and confident around this man. She knew that Winston was old enough and experienced enough. He would not hurt her, always support her, and also help her with her studies and explain simple truths. In general, the girl was happy, but to the last did not believe that Winston could make her a proposal. Arriving home to her parents in a small provincial town 250 kilometers from the regional center where she studied, Jennifer immediately told the truth about her relationship with a man who was almost twice her age. Are you crazy? Her mother rounded her eyes and clutched her head. You are 23 years old and he is 43. 20 years is almost a lifetime. 2 decades. Jennifer's father wasn't thrilled with his daughter's choice, but he was sympathetic to her feelings. Sharon, why do you resent it so much? There are a million families in the world, and they're strong enough, where the husband is older than his wife. It would be worse if it were the other way round. And Jennifer would be the guy who fell in love with an old aunt, he said. Dad, Winston is not old, Jennifer interceded for her lover. He's mature, he's wise, he's very experienced. What kind of doctor is he? Asked her mother. I'm glad your Winston is a good doctor, she said, her lips tightening. But it would be good if he was your age, not 20 years older. Edith, this is a disaster. Edward only hummed, without saying anything else. After a while, Jennifer dared to invite Winston to her parents' house for a visit. They came along with a cake and a bouquet of flowers. And then Marion melted, seeing before her a manly and intelligent man. Edic also did not say another word about what he thought about the choice of his daughter. Then Jennifer finally realized that Winston was the man with whom she would be truly happy. Maggie, however, when she saw what a grown-up groom her older sister had brought into the house, did not keep silent. "He's an old man," wrinkled nose said 17-year-old Maggie when she and her sister were alone. "What do you need it for?" Jennifer wanted to take offense at her sister's words, but then she managed to resist the urge and smiled softly. "You're not the one who has to live with him. What am I, you crying about him being old for me?" Maggie twitched her nose upwards and wrinkled it funny again. "Well, he's going to be a relative of mine. You look at him like you want to eat him. I'm sure you're already dreaming of marriage and a long life with that old man." "Don't call him that," Jennifer said, feeling herself getting angry with her younger sister. "He's not an old man. He's only 20 years older than I am. When you choose a fiancé, you can choose your own, but don't meddle in my affairs." "Your choice." Maggie shrugged her shoulders. "But sooner or later you'll regret marrying such an old man." Her younger sister's words were not prophetic. And not once in almost 6 years of married life Jennifer did not regret that she agreed to become Winston's wife. He proposed to her in her 5th year. Then Jennifer moved into his spacious 2-bedroom flat. Soon received a diploma, got a job in the clinic, and was going to enter the residency. When her parents came to visit their daughter for the first time after the wedding, they no longer opposed Jennifer's choice, but on the contrary, they were happy that the girl so successfully married and settled in the regional center. First impressions are deceiving, Marion grinned, strolling through the huge 3-bedroom apartment in the center of town. Winston turned out to be a very nice man. He paid for the wedding and brought you to his place. Hang on to him, daughter. He's a good man. "I know," Jennifer said with a smile. She was in love, happy and ready to move mountains. Being a doctor was a pleasure. Jennifer was sure that she had found a job she liked, and the results of her work pleased her. And each time convinced Jennifer that she had done the right thing. The only thing that confused the young wife of the famous gynecologist was that Winston constantly discouraged her from entering the residency. "Don't you like being a general practitioner?" he asked. "You're all glowing. You're happy to be working. So why go to school and waste your time doing it?" Jennifer didn't argue with her husband because she wasn't used to it. Winston's word was always paramount to her. So after a few months of thinking about her future, Jennifer decided that she would stay on as a general practitioner in a regular clinic. Her friends who had gone to university with her only shrugged their shoulders as they listened to Jennifer's explanations for her refusal to continue her studies. "Don't you think your Winston is just afraid of competition?" One of her former classmates once asked Jennifer. "You'll become a subspecialist and overshadow him with your practice." "You what?" Jennifer only laughed as she listened to her friend's words. Winston is too experienced and wise enough to be afraid of competition. Besides, he's a gynecologist, which is not my field of expertise. "Are you always defending him?" Grinned her mate. "You're used to the fact that he controls you in everything. He makes you dance to his tune. Personally, I'd be offended if my husband behaved like that." "That's why Winston's my husband, not yours," Jennifer tried to make a joke, but she was suddenly uncomfortable. What if there was truth in her friend's words? What if Winston was afraid that his wife might be better than him? Jennifer carefully avoided these thoughts. She didn't want to think badly of her husband. She loved him too much. 2 years after the marriage was registered, Jennifer thought about having a child. She was already 26. Her husband was an excellent gynecologist and she had no fears about motherhood. "Winston," she said, trying not to make the words sound like a decision she'd made alone. "Do you want children?" Winston looked at his wife somewhat distantly, as if Jennifer had started a conversation off topic. "Honey, why are you asking me that? You're 26 years old. It's too young to be thinking about this." "It is." Jennifer was annoyed by Winston's words. "I'm 26 years old, which is the right age to have a baby. You don't have children from your first marriage. Maybe it's time to become a father." There was so much hope and anticipation in Jennifer's voice that she could barely contain her emotions. As for Winston, it was as if he had no desire to become a father. "It's too early. Do your work. You need to make a name for yourself to be able to advance in the future." "But how am I going to get ahead if I'm just going to sit in a regular GP's office?" "You're the one who talked me out of going to school, and now you're talking me out of having a baby." Jennifer didn't notice that she had spoken with resentment in her voice. and she stopped when she saw her husband's stern look. "It's not time yet," Jennifer Winston said. And that was the end of the matter. Jennifer, unused to arguing with her husband because of his unwavering authority and age, had given herself her word that she would not bring up any more talk that displeased Winston. But Marian was not afraid to ask her eldest daughter such questions. "Do you and Winston think about children at all?" The question was painful, and Jennifer even wrinkled her nose at the unpleasant feeling inside. She and Winston had never revisited the topic of future parenthood, and what to answer her mother, Jennifer did not know. She was used to telling everyone the truth: her husband, her family, her colleagues, and her patients. But now that the question touched on such a painful subject, Jennifer didn't know how she could gently skirt the sharp edges. "It's too early for us. I'm working. Winston's working." "There's plenty of time," she said. I wouldn't say that Marian objected, looking closely at her daughter's face. "You'll be 30 soon. And you say it's early. I gave birth to you when I was 23. And that wasn't considered too early to give birth. It's harder to have a baby after 30. There's more pain and less time. What am I explaining to you? You're a doctor yourself." Jennifer was ashamed to admit to her mother that her husband didn't want children and thought it was too early for them to become parents. Winston was about to turn 50. That was a decent enough age for a man, especially one who had no children yet. Jennifer honestly didn't understand why her husband was so resistant to the idea of children, not interested in her women's health or trying to strengthen their family. It was getting harder and harder to return home. No one was waiting for Jennifer there. She longed for a husband who was always late at work. She even began to understand the first wife of Winston, who complained about the constant absences of her husband from home and filed for divorce because of his eternal employment. But when Jennifer remembered Winston's words about how much he wanted to meet someone who would understand him and not complain about his passion for work, she immediately tried to ward off the thought of resenting her husband for his devotion to his favorite work. Having calmed down a little mentally, Jennifer decided that she didn't want to get herself worked up anymore, that she had chosen the fate of being the wife of the head of one of the departments of a regional hospital. So it was not worth complaining about her plight or berating Winston for her constant absence from home and being in the hospital. After her appointment at the private clinic, she dialed her husband's number. "Where are you?" "Still in the hospital?" Jennifer asked the questions automatically, subconsciously guessing what Winston would answer her. "I'm at home, cooking dinner," her husband answered, and Jennifer's heart jumped joyfully in her chest. She'd been telling herself that Winston didn't want to be home with her, that he was looking for any excuse to stay late at work, and that he'd neglected his chores. "You surprised me," Jennifer said with undisguised joy. "What are you cooking?" "You'll find out when you get home," Winston laughed. "Maybe I want to surprise you? It won't be a surprise." Jennifer thought with awe of how wonderful her husband was. She was lucky, after all. And even though they were so rarely together, he was and still was the best man on the planet. As she entered the flat, she heard Winston's voice and someone else's female laughter. It wasn't until a moment later that Jennifer realized exactly where she had heard that laughter. It was her younger sister, Maggie, laughing. Jennifer remembered that Maggie was supposed to pick up her suitcase, but her sister usually called or texted her. She'd arrived without a call or a text. "Oh, sister, hello," Maggie waved to Jennifer without rising from her chair in the kitchen. "I thought I'd never see you again. Why didn't you call me?" Jennifer didn't like the fact that Maggie showed up at her house unannounced. "Why?" Maggie wondered. But the smile flickered off her lips. "You told me to come round after 3. I did. We never said we'd call or text." Jennifer didn't know why she resented her little sister's arrival so much. Maggie didn't seem to have done anything wrong. She had arrived on time, and they hadn't really agreed to call in advance. But for some reason, her sister's smile, her happy face, and her contented look caused Jennifer to feel a rush of negativity. "What's wrong with me?" Jennifer asked herself that question, but she had no answer. Maggie hadn't annoyed her this much before, even though she didn't always watch her words and sometimes offended Jennifer. Maggie was the exact opposite of her older sister. Daring, self-assured, self-loving, and not tolerating objections, and Jennifer was malleable, kind and non-confrontational. It was easier for her to agree than to argue to the point of frothing at the mouth. Maggie liked to argue, refute, prove her point of view, even if it was obvious that it was wrong. Winston set the table. By the time his wife returned from work, he had prepared fish and salad. Jennifer looked at the utensils Winston was setting on the table, but she couldn't remember the last time her husband had cooked anything himself. It had happened, but only at the beginning of the relationship, when Jennifer was still living in his flat as his wife-to-be. As soon as they legalized their relationship, all the duties of cooking, cleaning, laundry, and other household chores were fully transferred to the newly married wife of Winston. "Are you guys going on holiday?" Maggie asked in a cheerful voice. Jennifer heard a kind of gloating in her sister's question. Maggie regularly went on holiday with different men and in different countries, often allowed herself to go abroad alone. Jennifer, on the other hand, had never been to another country in her nearly 30 years of life. "We don't have time for holidays," she said, trying to keep her voice calm and confident. "We are working. You're the free-flying one." "That's right," Maggie smiled broadly. "I know how to take everything in life, and you all work and work until you retire. Is that how you're going to live?" Jennifer glanced at her husband sitting next to her. Winston was eating his fish with a nonchalant face, as if he wasn't even listening to what the women were saying at the table. "We're not." Jennifer rose abruptly from the table. "Have you eaten? Go get your suitcase." Maggie's face changed instantly. The smile fell from her lips, her eyebrows furrowed. The younger sister clearly hadn't expected such blatant inhospitality from her older sister. "Jennifer, what are you doing?" She pouted. "I'm not bragging or making fun of your lifestyle." "Well, you like to work. I don't mind." "Of course you do," Jennifer snorted. "Get your bags. Go and get ready for your next holiday. I'm very tired. Tomorrow is my only day off, and I really want to rest at least that day." Maggie was clearly offended. She thanked Winston dryly for lunch, then took her suitcase and, after a brief goodbye to Jennifer, left the house. Winston was silent the whole time and expressed no emotion. Suddenly he asked, "What are you doing? What, did she do something bad to you?" "What makes you think that?" "It's just that she takes up a lot of my time, effort, and energy. I'm tired, Winston. I wanted to spend this weekend with you, and here's Maggie and her stories about her trouble-free life." Winston grinned. "Are you jealous or something?" Jennifer felt a chill run down her spine. Her husband, who had always been characterized by his independence of opinion and lack of any emotion towards outsiders, had suddenly asked a rather strange question. A question that made Jennifer suddenly feel ashamed. Really, is it envy? Maggie was usually jealous of her older sister because she had things Maggie didn't have, opportunities Maggie didn't have due to her age. Guys who liked her older sister better than her younger sister. Jennifer was always one step ahead. And by the time she was 30, it suddenly slowed down and Maggie began to pull ahead in the quality of her life. She wasn't burdened with work, liked men, handled them skillfully, getting everything she needed and more. Jennifer seemed to be mired in her gray and boring life, with nothing but work and love for her husband. Her mood had completely soured after her sister left. And even though Winston stayed at home and was not going anywhere for work, Jennifer constantly replayed in her head her dialogue with Maggie. And why did her older sister have so much negativity inside her towards her younger sister? They had been communicating less and less lately. It had been fine at first. As soon as Maggie moved to New York, she was constantly asking to borrow money or to sleep over at Jennifer and Winston's flat. In the last 2 years, Maggie had become quite independent of both her parents and her older sister. "I completely forgot to tell you," Winston distracted his wife from sad thoughts. "On Tuesday, I'm leaving for a scientific and practical congress on obstetrics and gynecology. It turns out that I was scheduled to attend the congress, but I got so busy that I forgot about it." "That's strange." Jennifer looked at her husband in surprise. "Usually you prepare for congresses in advance. Suddenly you seem to have changed your attitude to such events." Winston brushed it off. "Work's a mess. People are quitting in droves and going to private clinics. I've lost track of time. HR called me last night and reminded me about the trip." "Where are you going?" Jennifer suddenly had a brilliant idea in her voice. What if she went to the Congress with her husband, took a few days off at work, spent time with Winston, and generally changed the environment? The idea was reckless, unusual for Jennifer. But she, annoyed by the meeting and conversation with her younger sister, suddenly also wanted to change something in her life. "To Boston," Winston said, "for 5 days." Jennifer smiled. "What if I come with you, take a leave of absence at my own expense, and we'll go to Boston together? I'll walk around the city waiting for you. We'll go to restaurants, visit a museum, go to the theater. Do you remember the last time we went out together?" Winston shook his head. "The Congress will go on from morning until late at night, and I won't have time to go to the theaters and restaurants," Winston said. "You're going to be upset, and you're going to tug at me and keep asking me when I'm coming to see you. I'll piss you off with my absence, and our mini holiday will be a nightmare. I've been through this before, honey, and I don't want it again." Jennifer looked at her husband as if he were directly discouraging her from traveling together. Not once in the 6 years they had been together had she said a word of reproach to him. Not once had she held him or made a scandal of his prolonged absences. Why now Winston spoke as if he did not know his wife at all, as if she in his eyes had turned into his ex-wife, whom he tried with all his might to forget. "Winston, don't you want me to come with you?" Jennifer asked uncertainly, still hoping she was imagining it. "I do," Winston said hotly. He jumped up from the couch where he'd been sitting watching TV, running around the living room with his arms crossed behind his back. Jennifer watched her husband as if she didn't recognize him as the man she had loved for so many years. "But I also want to work in peace, without the distraction of worrying about you sitting in a foreign city waiting for me. I want to meet my colleagues, chat with my professors. I want to get some sleep, after all." "Okay," Jennifer interrupted Winston and nodded briefly. "Please, just don't be so nervous. Let it be as you say." Winston abruptly stopped talking, sat down on the sofa and continued watching some medical TV program. Jennifer sat next to him and occasionally glanced at her husband, but it was as if he didn't see her. They used to sit and watch TV together like this, but now they had become complete strangers to each other. No children together, no jointly acquired property, no desire to go out and spend time together. Maybe this is the end of our marriage? Jennifer thought bitterly. He does not even want to hug me, kiss me. And we haven't had intimacy in almost a month. My husband hasn't laid a finger on me in a month, and that thought made me feel even more miserable. It seemed as if the whole world called family, so lovingly maintained for 6 years, had collapsed. Winston left on Tuesday, and up to that point nothing at all had changed in their relationship with Jennifer. The spouse no longer initiated intimacy. Jennifer kept looking at Winston, trying to figure out if he'd really lost interest in her, or if she was just imagining the problem. "There's no need to see me off," her husband said at once. "I'll go straight from the hospital to the airport. 5 days will fly by, and I'll be sure to bring you a present from Boston. Would you like that, honey?" "Of course I do," Jennifer said, and smiled a strained smile. The mood had been bad for a long time, and the situation with her husband's departure had spoilt it even more. Now Winston had asked her not to walk him to the airport, even though Jennifer couldn't do that. She worked until 3, and Winston's plane was due to leave at 5. Returning to the empty flat became a complete drag for Jennifer. She tried to stay late at work, pretending to work on paperwork and reports while she tried to stretch her time so she could get home as late as possible. The clinic closed at 8 p.m., and by that time Jennifer had to go home anyway, having vacated her office. To distract herself and not go crazy with boredom, Jennifer even signed up for yoga. She decided that she would attend a yoga studio in the evenings instead of coming home. It was both good for her health and a way to pass the time. When Jennifer returned from her first class on Thursday, she felt much better. She seemed to be energized after the workout. Her muscles were humming nicely and her body felt pleasantly tired. She wanted to go to bed as soon as possible, so that the day would be over. The sooner it was over, the sooner the new one would come. It wouldn't be long before Winston returned. Lying in bed under a blanket and looking at her social networking page, Jennifer saw Maggie's holiday photos. Her younger sister posed against the sea, standing in a brightly colored swimming costume. Jennifer quickly woke up looking at the pictures, trying not to dwell on the unpleasant thoughts that had arisen in her head. Enviously again, she thought, and quickly refreshed her social media page so that the pictures of her beautiful and happy little sister would disappear from her sight as soon as possible. However, updating the page, Jennifer suddenly noticed something unpleasantly cutting her eyes on one of the photos published by Maggie. Returning to her sister's page, Jennifer scrutinized Maggie's postings once more and then zoomed in on one of the photos. Her heart twitched unpleasantly in her chest. Her palms instantly sweated with excitement. In one of Maggie's photos, Jennifer saw a familiar figure in the reflection of a shop window. It was the figure of her husband, who had personally taken the photograph for the young girl. Jennifer enlarged the photo once more to make sure again that it was Winston. She recognized his figure, his hair, even his sunglasses. He was also wearing the plaid shirt Maggie had given him for the holiday. Back then, Jennifer had wanted to give that shirt to her father, but Winston had persuaded her to keep the gift. "Maggie gave the shirt to me. Why should I give it to your dad?" Winston asked unhappily. "Because it doesn't suit you," Jennifer replied. Jennifer didn't know why she was suddenly so attracted to Maggie's gift. Maybe it was because the shirt fit Winston so well. Jennifer herself had never guessed his taste. Her husband always dressed himself in the shops. He picked out his own shirts, trousers, jeans. He even bought his own underwear. And then some Maggie gave him a nice gift that Winston liked. Jennifer was nervous at the time. She was uncomfortable that her husband openly admired Maggie's taste, but he had a very different opinion of his own wife's taste. Until the last moment, Jennifer didn't want to believe that Winston was in the photograph. Then suddenly she remembered how her husband didn't want her to go to Boston with him, how he refused to let his wife accompany him to the airport. And that dinner he'd cooked, supposedly for his wife, had probably been prepared solely in honor of Maggie's arrival. Jennifer grabbed the phone in her hands and dialed Winston's number. "The caller is temporarily unavailable," an automated female voice answered. If Winston was in the United States, he would be in touch, but Jennifer's husband was in Greece. Of that she had no doubt. Then she dialed the number of his colleague Kevin, who was filling in for Winston during periods of his absence. Never before had Jennifer called Kevin on her own just for fun. If Winston found out about his wife's behavior now, he would clearly be displeased. "Jennifer, hello." Kevin's voice sounded soft and good-natured. "What happened to Winston? I can't get him on the phone. Is there a problem with his connection in Boston?" Jennifer clutched the phone tightly in her hand, feeling her fingers ache with tension. "Boston?" Kevin's voice sounded surprised now. "Had he gone to Boston? As far as I know, your husband went to stay with his parents in Chicago. He told me his father was sick, so he took a week off at his own expense. Winston visits his father a lot. I mean, he lives alone, he gets sick a lot. Or, Jennifer, am I confused?" Jennifer was silent, ready to cry. She knew very well that Winston does not communicate with his father. John Smith had lived in Philadelphia for many years, where he had gone with his new family while Winston was still at university. This story was told to Jennifer by Winston himself, but he apparently had a different version for his colleagues. "I'm sorry, Kevin, I'm on the phone with Winston," she said. "I got it wrong. I must have been working too hard." She switched off the connection, then tossed the phone aside with a squeamishness. Of course, no Winston had called her. She'd made up the story for Kevin, who could easily guess that Winston was misleading both his wife and his colleagues. So all her husband's trips to congresses, conferences, and other business trips were staged exclusively for her. For his colleagues, Dr. Smith went to his father, while his wife was quietly waiting for him at home, even unaware of the double life her husband led. After a while, Jennifer's hand reached for the phone. Fighting her own reluctance to know the truth, she went back to her sister Bridget's page. Here was her trip to Hawaii in April. Winston had flown to Los Angeles for a fortnight, and Jennifer had been surprised to see how tanned her husband had been when he returned from Los Angeles. And it turns out that in April in Los Angeles is so sunny. "I walked a lot. I did not notice how I burned," said Winston then. Jennifer didn't say anything to him. It did not even occur to her that her husband could be somewhere else, for example, in a hot country with her younger sister. And here was another of Maggie's trips, this time to the Bahamas. Winston was away from home then, too. He was supposedly on a flight to Denver. Except it was summer outside, and it was normal for him to return with a slight tan. There were other trips. Jennifer had counted at least 5 in the last 40 minutes. It had started almost 2 years ago. At least the joint disappearances from Jennifer's life had been observed since the December before last. And Ben had just turned 21 at the time. She'd barely graduated from university and got a job as a receptionist at a beauty parlor. But she worked there for just under 6 months. She quit in December, and then in March she and Winston were out of town together. Bridget chattered something about a new lover, after which there was another, then again another and another third. But Jennifer was not interested in her younger sister's private life, and for nothing. I wonder if she met only with Winston or in parallel? Jennifer thought. Did she have other men? She was still in shock at her own discovery. To have lived with her husband for so many years, and now to suddenly find out that for the past 2 years he had been lying to her, dating her sister, traveling the world with her, paying for her purchases, catering to her every desire. His wife had done his laundry, cooked his breakfasts, lunches, and dinners, and waited faithfully for him at home. Without a word or a hint, she never let him know she was unhappy with anything. Jennifer was comfortable. People like her were usually called patient. By morning, she was sick of her own thoughts. All night she had been thinking that she had to make some decision about her future, because she would never have a future with Winston. I wondered, Jennifer thought, what was the purpose of this marriage show? He would have divorced me and lived with Maggie, if he liked being with her so much. He'd long since grown cold to me. Winston came home as promised on Sunday, happy and lightly tanned. He called Jennifer a couple of times via Messenger, sending her some meaningless pictures to put her guard down. She'd responded to him with something to keep Winston from guessing that she knew all about his cheating perfectly well. Jennifer prepared herself for the conversation, going to clear the air. She had to gather her strength to find the right words that would not make her feel ashamed. No, she wouldn't make hysterics and scandals. They would part ways quietly if Winston wanted them to. What do I want? Jennifer thought. I want to endure further. I am willing to endure because I love this man and would do anything to be with him. I haven't existed apart from Winston for a long time. I belong to him completely. I'm like his soulmate that would die if I was separated from him. Winston talked cheerfully about his trip, making up stories as he went along that didn't really happen. Jennifer listened to him, smiling and nodding, while she realized with every passing minute that she couldn't tell Winston that she knew everything. She couldn't live without him. She never got round to talking to him, and after a few days she calmed down and decided that she would not part with her husband. She loved him and let him have an affair on the side. It was easy to break up a marriage, but to keep it together was still a challenge. So Jennifer decided she would endure to the end. At the end of another working day, when she was about to go home, there was a knock at her office. "The reception is over," Jennifer shouted, but the door opened anyway. Maggie stood on the doorstep, and the older sister's insides snapped at the sight of her younger sister. "Why are you here?" Jennifer asked with whitened lips. "We need to have a serious talk," Maggie replied. Jennifer realized then that something had happened. Something had happened that was out of her control. Something she had miscalculated. What it was, she was going to have to find out from her younger sister. "I'm pregnant," Maggie said after a long silence. The sisters sat next to each other, carefully avoiding the opportunity to look into each other's eyes, and remained silent until Maggie said 2 words that turned Jennifer's mind completely upside down. "Do I have to answer something?" Barely moving her lips, Jennifer asked. Jennifer's insides felt as if they had collapsed, and her lips and tongue stopped obeying her. "Shouldn't I?" Maggie replied shortly. "I'm the one who has to tell you. I'm pregnant by Winston, your husband. I'm tired of hiding the fact that I've been with him for a long time." Jennifer was silent. She fumbled with a piece of paper that had appeared on her desk. She couldn't say anything. It was like her tongue was stuck to her mouth. "Can you hear me?" Maggie asked demandingly. "I'm expecting your husband's child. I've been sleeping with him for a long time. A fortnight ago, he and I were on holiday in Miami, and before that we had sex at your house. Remember that spontaneous dinner at your place? You came over and told me to get my suitcase and you were leaving. I did. Only before that, I slept with your husband in your marital bed." The words were harsh, and Jennifer felt completely embarrassed by the filth. She didn't feel like it. She had tried to save her marriage to the last. Except who wanted it? Nobody. The child needed a father. No matter how immoral the child had been conceived, he was not to blame for his mother's recklessness, for his father's uncontrolled behavior. "What do you want from me?" Jennifer asked dryly. "For me to congratulate you? That I run home and scandalize my husband? That I look at myself in the mirror and try to see horns on my head?" Jennifer was about to scream, but Maggie, sitting across from her, kept her composure. Yes, that young woman had a lot of composure. She'd been scolded so many times by her parents, her grandmother, her teachers. Maggie didn't care about any of that. She had a way of keeping her cool, and that made Jennifer even more annoyed. "I want you to know the truth," Maggie said and stood up. "What you're going to do next, I don't know." "But I do," Jennifer said through gritted teeth. She left, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume. Jennifer thought about it and breathed in the air, realizing that she had often smelled it on her husband's shirts, the same shirts that her younger sister Maggie must have helped him buy. Everything in her family wasn't real her husband's love, the family idol, the way they lived together. So there was no happiness in the Winston household. Then why did they waste their time on each other? Returning home after work, Jennifer caught Winston there. Quickly gathering the necessary clothes into her suitcase, she put her books, laptop, and tablet in there as well. Then she closed it and sat down next to it on the bed. Covering her eyes, she tried to listen to herself and her sensations. What did she feel? Fear, resentment, hurt, disappointment. The last was perhaps the most vivid feeling. It was disappointment that Jennifer felt at losing her fake family. It was only an imitation of happiness, so it was necessary to leave without regret. Taking a piece of paper, Jennifer wrote a short note to Winston in the quick handwriting she had become accustomed to during her years at the clinic. "I know all about you and Maggie. I see no point in staying in this house. I will divorce you myself. We have nothing to share. Let's part amicably." There were no other words that came to mind. Jennifer did not write a long speech, but simply picked up her suitcase and left the flat. She took one last look at the wedding photograph hanging on the living room wall, where she and Winston were smiling broadly and happily, and got into the car. Their happiness was still real then. Jennifer calmly drove out of the city, refueled, and drove down the motorway. There were more than 300 kilometers to go. Staring into the darkness, she tried to remain calm and composed. Around 5 a.m., she was near a village with no streetlights, but a crumbling sign at the entrance and something that looked like a monument to chicken pox. Pulling over, Jennifer got out of the car, breathed in the fresh country air, and finally let the tears flow. For the 5 hours that Jennifer had been on the road, she had managed to remain calm and confident. But the village had turned her inside out. Standing in the darkness and the rain that had begun to fall, she felt endlessly tired and homesick. "Pull yourself together," she commanded herself, and then settled back behind the wheel and drove towards home. The house Jennifer stopped the car at had once belonged to her grandmother Julia, the mother of her father and Aunt Maggie. All her life, her grandmother had lived in this village 50 kilometers from her hometown. Several times she visited her son and his family, but she herself did not go anywhere further than the village. While Julia was still alive, she signed over her house to her eldest granddaughter Jennifer. Maggie, learning of this then, took great offense at her sister. "You always get the best of everything," she cried with tears in her voice, "and the best room and clothes. Now grandmother's house too." "My God, Maggie, don't scream." Marian then cringed at her youngest daughter's loud, hysterical scream. "It's a house in the middle of nowhere. What do you want it for? No one has bought anything in this village for a long time, so you wouldn't get any benefit even if your grandmother wrote the house in your name." "What's that got to do with it?" Maggie smeared tears down her face. "How am I any worse than Jennifer? Why does she get everything all the time and I get everything on my own?" Jennifer remained silent at the time. She remembered how many times during her grandmother's lifetime she had visited her in the village, monitored her health, went with her to the city clinic, prescribed medicines. Maggie had never once visited her grandmother in her entire adult life. Once in a while she called her, and that only to borrow money, which in the end did not return. But after the death of her grandmother, who left the house to the eldest granddaughter, Maggie took offense, as usual, accused her older sister that she gets everything for nothing, for the pretty eyes. Maggie didn't speak to Jennifer for a long time after that. The house, left after the death of Julia's grandmother, was small, rather dilapidated, but inside it was very cozy and warm. Jennifer, every time she came to the village to visit her grandmother's grave, stopped in the house with joy and awe, looking at the old crockery, photographs, paintings on the wall, small statuettes on the chest of drawers. And everything in the house was the same as it had been when Grandma Julia was still alive. As children, when Jennifer was 12 and Maggie was 6, they had come together to visit her grandmother for the summer. That summer seemed to Jennifer the happiest of her life, but Maggie didn't like it in the village. "I hate goat's milk, and I don't like cow's milk, it's fatty. And I don't want to eat pancakes. My grandmother can't bake them. And I won't eat the chicken that has been running around since morning, I feel sorry for it. And I will not go to the vegetable garden, my nose will burn. And then there will be a trace." Whatever Grandma Jennifer offered, Maggie refused. She did not like country life. The girl thought it was boring and monotonous, but Jennifer enjoyed spending time with her grandmother. Most of all, she liked to go with her grandmother Julia to the collective farm, where she worked as a veterinarian. Perhaps it was from these trips that Jennifer's love of medicine was born. "You have the makings of a future doctor," Julia said. "Think about your future. You may want to connect it with medicine." Jennifer had made up her mind then. She would definitely be a doctor, she would help people. That was her calling, and she was happy with her choice, immensely grateful to her grandmother for her support. And now Jennifer was back at her grandmother's house. Only this time she came not for a while, but for permanent residence. There was nowhere else to go. To stay in the house where Winston was, there was neither strength, nor desire, nor possibility. Jennifer could not claim her husband's flat. It was his personal property. And she had no place of her own, for until a few weeks ago the young woman had had the assurance that she would be with her husband until she was old. But no, not all wishes were destined to come true, and Jennifer had experienced this firsthand. Collapsing onto the bed, she buried her face into the pillow. The bedclothes smelled damp, and the house itself, unheated and uninhabited for several years, didn't look much like a cozy nest. Jennifer had a lot of work to do to put the house in order, quit her old job, get a job in the village, file for divorce. But most importantly, learning to live a new life in which Winston would no longer be there. Remembering him, Jennifer picked up the phone. 15 missed calls from her husband, 2 missed calls from her mother, and 1 from her father. Maggie hadn't called her, and Jennifer bitterly imagined how happy she and Winston were to be together. Calling her mother, Jennifer told it like it was. "I've left Winston. I'm going to live in the country." "How, but why? You have such an amazing husband. How did you have the courage to leave him? And more importantly, why?" "Ask your youngest daughter," Jennifer replied, feeling a surge of anger again. No, it was urgent to pull herself together, to push away the anger, jealousy, and resentment. There should be nothing in her life that connected her to the past. "What has Maggie to do with it?" Marion didn't hide her surprise. "Maggie is expecting my husband's child. In fact, she's been seeing him for a long time." "Mom, let's close this topic. I'll buy a new SIM card tomorrow and this number won't be available. I'm filing for divorce, changing my life and my job." Marion was still shouting something into the phone, but Jennifer wasn't listening to her anymore. Jennifer was terribly sleepy. It was already late at night. She didn't want to think about anything. She fell into sleep. At her grandmother's house, Jennifer thought longingly of the next day, which would now be radically different from the days she was used to. In the morning, she woke up with her nose tangled in the blanket. The house was cold, and it appeared that the first snow had fallen outside the window. Jennifer was glad that she had managed to cover the 300 kilometers on a dry road. But she would hardly have dared such a rash act if there had been ice on the motorway. She had to do something about the stove. She also had to buy groceries and call her former job. Having somehow explained the situation, Jennifer listened to a lot of complaints from the head doctor, but managed to agree to send her resignation letter by registered mail. "You've really let us down," shouted into the phone head doctor. And Jennifer understood it well without him. Leaving the polyclinic without a therapist in the midst of flu and acute respiratory viral infections was unfair, ill-considered, and selfish, in the doctor's opinion. Jennifer did not initiate him into the details of her personal life, saying that she went to another city for family reasons. Having resolved the job issue, she dressed warmly and went to the post office. "Oh my God," Jennifer, the operator, addressed her, holding out an envelope and a blank sheet on which Jennifer was to write her resignation letter. "Yes, that's me," Jennifer smiled weakly, remembering how she and her grandmother Julia had once gone to this woman's house to watch little newborn piglets. Postal Service operator Rachel lived 2 houses down from the late Julia. "Why are you here?" "I'm here to visit my grandmother's grave." "And why would you write a letter?" Jennifer sighed. Now she would have to get used to a new life where everyone and everything had to know everything. That was what village life was like, and there was nothing Jennifer could do about it. Jennifer guessed that after her visit to the post office, news of her arrival would spread throughout the village. "I'm going to live here," she decided that it was better to tell the truth at once than to answer a million more questions from the villagers. There were about 200 people living in the village. All of them had known the late Julia, and Jennifer herself might have to meet them all. Some she knew and remembered, some she had yet to make acquaintance with. Live Rachel's face stretched. "Why's that?" "You didn't fit in at the regional center." "No, it didn't," Jennifer sighed. "And we've got a paramedic about to retire." Now Rachel's face lit up with a happy smile. "Listen, you're a doctor. Why don't you come down to the paramedic station and talk to Sharon? She's just sitting there. She's almost 70 years old. She should be looking after her own health, not treating the villagers." Jennifer nodded, not really thinking about working at the paramedic station. In fact, she was more inclined to think about working in a nearby town that would have its own clinic. "Rachel, do you know who can help me with the cooker? I don't know how to use it. It's very cold in the house." "Is that what city folk mean?" Rachel grinned. "I think my Oliver can help you too." "Oliver?" Jennifer tried to remember a certain Oliver, but to no avail. "Yes, my son. He's just visiting me right now. He came back from his shift, and instead of going to his place, he's staying with me for the time being. Either he had a fight with his wife, or he just doesn't want to go home. Anyway, come to my place. He was supposed to chop wood today. And he'll give you some wood and help you with the stove." Jennifer thanked her neighbor and almost ran to her house. The thought of returning to a house that looked more like a huge glacier did not please her at all. "I don't want to fall down in these parts," Jennifer thought. "There are no proper hospitals here, no way to get a full checkup." Oliver was home. When Jennifer saw him through the fence, she didn't immediately recognize him as the boy she had once run to the river with. They had been 14 years old then. The boy seemed overly bold and brave, and he was a real bully. "And I recognized you straight away," Oliver smiled. "Remember when you almost drowned? And I saved you." Jennifer laughed. "I didn't drown. You didn't save me? You pushed me into the river yourself. But now you could very well save me. My cooker doesn't work in my house, and I have no idea how to use it. Will you help me?" Oliver agreed. Together they worked out how to use the cooker properly. Then they drank tea, laughing and reminiscing about their childhood and their childhood mischief. Afterwards, they discussed mutual acquaintances, about whose fate Oliver knew much more than Jennifer, who had lived in the regional center for a long time. Then the topic drifted to a discussion of her own personal life. Jennifer didn't go into details, only briefly told him that she had left her husband and would now try to start a new life. "But you're a risk taker," Oliver said admiringly. "To take a sudden change like that, I don't think I'm capable of that at all." "You don't know the details, that's why you think that way," Jennifer replied sadly. Before she knew it, she was talking to her childhood friend, and they sat there until lunchtime. The house was warm and cozy, and she didn't want to stop talking to such an interesting person. Jennifer suddenly realized that over the many years she had been married to Winston, she had completely forgotten what long, intimate conversations were like. After all, in the last few years, Winston was always busy. He had neither the time nor the inclination to talk to his wife. You must have discussed all the interesting things with Maggie, Jennifer thought bitterly, sinking back into her sad thoughts. And why are you stuck at your mother's? Why aren't you going home? Jennifer asked Oliver to distract herself from the realization of the worthlessness of her past life. Oliver shrugged. Honestly, I'm afraid to. My wife recently had a baby and I don't feel like I can handle it. Jennifer raised her eyebrows in surprise. You're afraid you won't be able to handle your own child? Are you serious? Oliver nodded. Seriously? Why? I'm a regular working man, my hands aren't made for this. When I pick up a pram, God forbid I drop it or push it. I'm afraid. Anyway, so I've been stalling. I fixed my mother's shed, rebuilt the roof. I'm thinking, what else can I do so I can go on shift right afterwards without going home? Oliver, it doesn't work that way. Jennifer shook her head. You put yourself in your wife's shoes. How does she feel? What does she think about you not going home? Her hormones are already raging right now. She's having a hard time, not getting enough sleep with a small child. And you didn't even come and see him? You want to, don't you? Oliver nodded, lowering his head. I want to, but I'm afraid to. You're a big man, and you're afraid of a small, helpless baby. Oliver, come on. You have a little brother, don't you? You spent your whole childhood with him, carrying him everywhere. Your mom almost left you with him forever. Nothing happened. I wasn't thinking straight then, Oliver said. I didn't have much choice. My parents made me do it. Now no one does. Yeah, Jennifer grinned. Did you ever think about the fact that your stressed out wife is going to take it upon herself not to let you on the doorstep when you finally get the courage to do it? Oliver looked at Jennifer, and his eyes grew wider and wider. Why wouldn't she let me in? I'm the husband. And where are you now? Are you the husband? Why are you sitting here? Not with your family, doing everything you can to avoid seeing your wife and child, Oliver. But she has every right to do the same, to never see you, Jennifer said. Oliver fell silent. There was nothing for him to object to. The next day, though, when Jennifer met Rachel, she learned from her that Oliver had gone to stay with his family. Packed up all his things dramatically yesterday and ran for the bus this morning. Thank God his brains are back in place. And that stuck out at my place, and at home a small son with his wife. Even I was embarrassed. Jennifer smiled and said nothing. As she walked to the shop, she thought about the fact that she might have made a husband and wife closer by bringing something good into the world. Now that she wasn't treating her patients, and she'd fled the city in disgrace, leaving her patients for other doctors, she felt guilty. The situation with Oliver at least redeemed that guilt a little. Entering the shop, Jennifer looked disappointedly at the shelves. She realized that village grocery shopping was going to be a disappointment. The shelves were lined with cereals, sugar, salt, washing powders, and shampoos. And it was impossible to buy the usual meat, frozen vegetable mixes, and dairy products. What are you going to buy? Jennifer was approached by a shop assistant, and in her Jennifer recognized her childhood friend Chloe. She recognized her with great difficulty because Chloe had changed so much. She and Jennifer were about the same age, except that Chloe was 1 or 2 years older. But she looked in her 30s and tails for all 45. The woman was clearly a heavy drinker. Her face was haggard, her eyes were red, and her hands were shaking, as if Chloe had drunk a lot the day before. Chloe, it's you, isn't it? Jennifer asked instead of answering, and the woman tightened her lips and nodded faintly. Let's say it's me. What are you going to buy? I have a closing in 10 minutes, Chloe replied impolitely. Ah, closing time, Jennifer grinned to herself. Behind Chloe's back, she saw an open bottle of vodka on one of the shelves and next to it a shot glass and sliced apples. Chloe was clearly not going to close up to finish the day's work, but to get a hangover. You've just changed so much, Jennifer said, continuing to insist and watching the way Chloe's eyes raced. And you smell so heavy in here. It's spoiled goods. It stinks from the back room, Chloe replied quickly, and then threw her chin up defiantly. What are you doing here? Telling me off? Buy your food and go back to your place. Rude, Chloe, Jennifer said in an even voice, not trying to take offense at her former mate. It's not my fault you look 40 years old. You have kids, don't you? My grandmother told me. Look, get out of here, Chloe shouted. She ran out from behind the counter and forcefully pushed Jennifer towards the exit. You're going to teach me about life. Idea girl, teach others. Chloe, if you need help, come to me, Jennifer managed to say before the shop assistant slammed the shop door in her face. Having not bought anything from the shop, Jennifer decided that she would drive to a nearby town. The snow on the roads was already melting. She needed time to buy groceries and change the summer tires for winter ones. When she returned home in the evening, she noticed a female figure at the gate of Julia's grandmother's cottage. In the darkness, it was hard to make out who it was. But then Jennifer realized it was Chloe, the same one who had pushed her out of her shop back in the morning. Let's go inside, Jennifer said, holding out 2 bags to Chloe. Will you help me carry the groceries in? Chloe obediently followed Jennifer in. At first, they sat in silence. Then Jennifer put the kettle on, poured tea into mugs, placed vases of sweets on the table. Try some, they're delicious. I know they're very rare here. I used to buy them for the kids. Chloe suddenly burst into tears. Her shoulders were shaking, and Jennifer, silently watching the woman sitting opposite, got up from her chair, poured water into a glass and handed it to her guest. Help me, Jennifer, Chloe pleaded. I can't stop. Since Ben died, I've been going downhill. I know I should stop, but I can't. It's like there's a force in me that makes me drink vodka. I drink it, but it doesn't get easier, and I keep dreaming about Ben, and the children crying, and I can't control myself, Chloe said through her tears. Jennifer nodded. Okay, I'll try to help you. Firstly, you're going to buy some pills in town, you're going to take them, and if you drink after them, they'll take you to the hospital. Secondly, they'll dull your desire to drink. We'll go into town together tomorrow. We'll make an appointment for you to see a doctor there. You should definitely do that. I'll drive you myself, go with you to the appointment, because I suspect you won't have the courage or strength to do it yourself. Chloe looked at Jennifer with wet eyes, nodded occasionally, and sipped water from the glass. Are you really going to help me? Is that what you want? I want your children to grow up to be normal people, not afraid of their mother and not see everything that happens to you. You don't think about them as much as you usually do. But you do, Jennifer said with a smile and handed Chloe a candy bar. Take it, eat it, stay at my place tonight. You'll do something stupid like you did this morning and you'll be sorry. A few days after this conversation, when Jennifer and Chloe had already gone to the city, together went to the hospital, and Chloe was scheduled for treatment, people came to Jennifer's house. They all had different problems. Someone wanted to be cured of excessive alcohol consumption. Someone was worried about back pain. Someone in the stomach. In general, Chloe, who worked in the only shop in the village, encouraged after seeing a doctor and receiving help from Jennifer, told all the other residents about the dependability of her new friend and the fact that she worked in the regional center as a therapist. Jennifer never said no to anyone. And now the house of Masha's late grandmother turned into a kind of outpatient clinic. They brought her vegetables, meat, chicken, eggs. Someone tried to slip Jennifer money, but she took only food, and that is a thank you from happy old ladies who received prescriptions for medicines and learnt that they had no deadly diseases. Then Sharon, the same one who worked at the local health center as a paramedic, came to Jennifer's house. Enough of this nonsense, Jenny, she said. Did you get your employment history? Go to town and get you employed. I'm retiring. I've already written my application. And you shouldn't be taking people in and treating them with pickles in your house. Jennifer nodded. Totally agree with what Sharon said. She was going to go to town with the paperwork herself, but Sharon beat her to the punch with her suggestion. 2 weeks later, Jennifer was taking appointments at the local nursing station. She often thought about her old life, but she had no regrets. She had too much work to do, which finally gave her a burst of energy and a desire to move on with her life. In the course of her work, she managed to file for divorce, then received a certificate of divorce. She went to the regional center twice and fortunately did not meet her ex-husband or her sister. In conversations with her mother, Jennifer carefully avoided the topic of her past life. She never asked about Maggie, and Marion tactfully left out how her sister and ex-husband Winston lived. Jennifer didn't know about it and didn't want to know. She guessed that both Maggie and Winston knew perfectly well that Jennifer lived in the settlement. Only neither of them had ever come to her, repented or apologized. In February in the township, as the blizzards began, they came one after another, and the local authorities, unaccustomed to such bad weather, were surprised that by the end of winter, this time of year was just beginning to gain momentum. "It's a wicked winter," explained one of the old ladies who came to see Jennifer. "It doesn't want to go away. It fights spring. We always have snowfalls in February, so much snow. It melts quickly, but it doesn't get swept away by the wind. Be well." Jennifer nodded. She still had much to learn about village life, which she was finally starting to get used to after a few months. The village was peaceful, quiet, and life flowed at a measured pace. Jennifer liked her job, and now she knew everyone in the small village. "Thank you, Julia," they often said to her, referring to her grandmother. "Raised such a wonderful granddaughter. A pleasure to us all." Jennifer smiled modestly, not commenting on the patient's words. It did make her happy to know that her grandmother spoke so well of her. It meant she had lived a life worth living. One snowstorm, Jennifer left work early. The patients were gone, and a real snowstorm was brewing outside her window. After closing the nurse's station, Jennifer trudged through the snowdrifts towards her home. As she approached, she noticed the open gate, but thought that it had opened because of strong gusts of wind. However, as she stepped up onto the porch, she saw the door to the house open. "What the hell is that?" she muttered as she approached the door, and then noticed a man's boots at the entrance. Her heart sank. As if in slow motion, she walked into the house and saw Winston sitting at the table. Turning around, he looked at her with an intimidated look, then gave her a strained smile. "Sorry, I'm uninvited." And Jennifer stopped in the doorway and leaned helplessly with her back against the door. It was unclear whether her strength had left her from the arduous journey home or because of her ex-husband's arrival. "Why did you come?" With difficulty moving her lips, she asked. "I came to beg forgiveness," he replied, rising from his chair. "I wanted to come sooner, but I lacked courage. Forgive me." Outside the window, the elements raged. Jennifer wanted to push Winston out the door, to slam the door in his face as Chloe had once done to her. But the blizzard was too frightening, and she wouldn't dare throw a man out into the weather and put his life in danger, even if she very much wanted to hurt someone who had once hurt herself. "I forgave you long ago," Jennifer replied. "I've already forgotten about everything, and I advise you to forget about everything. Live happily ever after," Jennifer said. "I even left myself to give you the opportunity to be a happy husband and father of your child." "Maggie is not pregnant by me," Winston replied. "I can't have children. All these years I haven't told you the truth. My first wife left me for that reason, and I was afraid of losing you, so I kept quiet. Maggie's pregnancy, by which she wanted to keep me, was a consequence of her frivolous life." Jennifer grinned. "You chose that girl, now take responsibility for it yourself. I don't want to know anything." Winston approached Jennifer and tried to take her hands, but she took a step backwards. Then he suddenly dropped to his knees, lowering his head and holding out his hands to his ex-wife. Jennifer cringed, seeing the pathetic picture before her. How many times had she imagined Winston begging her forgiveness? But now this moment had come, and she felt nothing but squeamishness and a desire to end this spectacle as soon as possible. "Come on, get off your knees, it won't do you any good," she said. "I realized exactly why you were here today. You took advantage of the bad weather so I couldn't kick you out, but it won't help you." Winston lifted his head and looked into her face. "Do you really like this life? Do you like living in the township, socializing with these uneducated and miserable people? You are a doctor with a capital letter." "Shut up," Jennifer interrupted him. "It's not for you to talk about how bad people live here. You're not known for your own integrity. And I could have been a doctor with a capital letter if I'd gone on to further study. You talked me out of it. Now I'm going to be a little doctor in this little village. I'm leaving. And I want you gone by the time I get back. You put the key back where you got it from." Jennifer walked out of the house, breathing heavily and gulping for air. It was hard to walk, the wind whipping in her face, filling her eyes with snow. But Jennifer didn't stop, stepping firmly through the loose snow. After a few minutes, having overcome a snowdrift almost a meter high, she knocked on the door of Chloe's house. Half an hour later, they were sitting at the table drinking tea. "So, did you really kick him out?" Chloe asked. "I asked him to go home. I didn't kick him out," replied Jennifer. "I can't live with a man who betrayed me once. If I do, I'll be constantly expecting him to betray me again. No, I can't do that. If my Ben were alive, I think I would forgive him for the sake of our children," Chloe said then, sobbing, and put her arm around Jennifer's shoulders, rocking her like a child. "We don't have children, and there's no point in our marriage," Jennifer replied. "Winston can't have children." After saying those words and looking at Chloe's 2 kids playing cars on the bed in the room, Jennifer smiled. She wants kids. She wants to live a happy new life where there will be no room for betrayal. It was necessary to wait a little while. And sooner or later, a big love was sure to appear in her little life. And a roll of black. "Please," Maggie added and sighed. With her mind, she knew that she should get used to it. She wasn't a little girl. But somewhere inside, something froze desperately every time she had to go to the store, or to the post office, or any place that required contact with human society. Now it was happening all over again. No, she wasn't going to cry at the unfair offense. She'd outgrown that long ago, but still. Don't meet anyone's eyes. Don't respond to angry, cruel words. Just exist in the present moment. Live, breathe, do what you need to do, and then exist in the next moment, and so on, endlessly. This strange but unexpectedly effective advice was given to her by Vivian, a colleague at work, and as Maggie knew for sure, almost the only living soul who was not disgusted by her. "You, Maggie, be strong," Vivian had told her more than once. "Build up your thick skin like a hippopotamus." But it wasn't easy to follow that good advice. It seemed to Maggie that she would be happy to exchange bodies with a hippopotamus and spend her life in Africa, splashing in the cool waters of the Nile or Lake Titicaca. But reality was not magical, materialistic, and ruthless to the extreme for someone like her. "We're out of powdered milk," Lexi said, stretching her immense muffin shape after looking at the lower shelves for what she was asking for. "Are you going to get fresh?" "I will," Maggie nodded. "Do they have plain condensed milk? Or only with coffee?" "Oh, can you hurry up? There's people waiting. And I have to go to Edie's for cheese." Taya, the mother of a large family, who had to go to the store as a breath of fresh air, because at that time the 4 youngest children were left under the care of the 5th eldest 12-year-old Timmy. "Come on, Taya." Nick, the tractor driver and the village's main joker, grinned with a gap-toothed smile. "Can't you see that Maggie wants to sweeten her life for us? What else can she do but eat condensed milk and chocolates, eh? Other joys of woman's life." At these words, Nick winked and dashingly snapped his cap. "I don't see any, you know." A chuckle passed along the line like a breeze over dry grasses. It was almost harmless, but with a subtext Maggie knew well. "You're a stranger to us. You're not like us and you're flawed. We should pity you. But we don't want to. You're not worthy of pity, so we'll mock you. That's your lot. Accept it, and don't you dare resist our fun." In general, Maggie never really thought about how many people in the village of New York cannot tolerate it, in fact, and how many participates in this collective bullying, so to speak, for company. She had only recently learned about what had been happening to her since she was a young girl, which is exactly what the name of this phenomenon is: collective bullying, at the suggestion of Vivian. Working in a library brings people together. And 2 single women, even more so. Maggie had come here exactly 3 years ago, right out of high school. And in fact, without any education should not have been accepted, but Vivian put in a word with Freddie the head and said that Maggie the girl is Nachitnya smart, and since the library willing to go to work, the queue is not behind the threshold, so we must take Maggie. For Maggie, the world changed for the better for the first time in years. She had a job, and even if it paid very, very little, but it was enough for her. There was enough to pay for light and other utilities, enough to eat the simplest things and the rest. Maggie still wore the clothes that her mother had bought. New bought a jacket, demi-seasonal, and winter boots, and let the quality was market, and if carefully worn, not 1 year enough. Neither cosmetics, nor jewelry, nor even all sorts of things in the house unnecessary Maggie did not buy. Just no need. Once there were aspirations for all sorts of material things, but then, when it became finally and ruthlessly clear what it all somehow lost meaning. And now Maggie saved herself in books. Oh, books. New York's library collection was rich. Classics, that is, naturally, first of all, and in a huge assortment. But there were also a lot of novelties. The superintendent, with Vivian's support, kept an eye on that. And Vivian regularly replenished the collection with what she herself had bought and read. "I don't like to reread," she once explained. "How many more books are waiting for me, so why go back to the old ones? So let people rejoice." And the first person to rejoice was Maggie. Vivian never said so, but she had chosen some of the new books to please her young assistant. They say that life is more interesting than any book. Vivian liked to repeat with various variations of details. And I'll tell you this, what kind of life should it be to be cooler than that detective story? Well, in the red cover, last month with you read. No, let such interesting adventures remain on the pages of books, otherwise you may not leave alive. Or in life, if you are very lucky, you will meet one love. But here, you open books and once so many interesting men, and all sorts of different. They're you and noble aristocrats, and brave detectives, and generous millionaires. No, Maggie, personally I from books, no matter what happens in life, no way will not give up. They're my bread. 45-year-old Vivian was born, raised and married here in New York. She knew little Maggie and her mother. But then, after her husband, who went to earn a lot of money, Vivian went to a distant city. Only that did not add up great hopes. Her husband died tragically in an accident at a construction site, and Vivian returned to her small homeland. She got a job in the same place where she used to work in the library. Maggie hurriedly put away her purchases in a cloth shopping bag. She didn't like plastic bags because she had read in a magazine how they were harmful to the environment. Her lips tightened, her eyes widened a little, an unconscious expression on her face, a concentration that helped her stay in the moment, and not to throw haggard glances around, reproachful, questioning, "Why are you doing this to me, people?" After paying for her purchases, Maggie left the store. "No, did you see that?" exclaimed Annie, a woman who came into the store strictly once a week when her roommate brought in his paycheck to buy hot drinks and snacks. "Did you see her face?" "Yes, we have," Taya snorted derisively. "She went out all proud and didn't even look at people." Annie continued to murmur. "She walks around like that, like she's out of this world. She should have accepted that she was ugly and not made a fool of herself." Outside there was the smell of a near thunderstorm and bittersweet cherry blossoms, and the wind was driving a dusty little whirlwind along the road. But higher up, the air was clean and fresh, full of the life-giving succulence of the grasses. The wind was coming from the side of the meadow by the Nesmiana River. Maggie tilted her head back and squeezed her eyes shut, inhaled deeply into her lungs and belly, and exhaled slowly. She opened her eyes and squinted at the disk of the sun sinking slowly toward the horizon. Evening was coming. I was done with business for the day. It had been a long day off, which she'd spent doing some house cleaning. Tomorrow, back to work. But tonight, well, of course she would spend it with a book. Maggie could read fast, as Vivian said, swallow literature. She hurried to her house, which stood at the very edge of the village, and was one of its oldest buildings. The foundations, according to archival documents, were laid at the end of the 19th century. We laid out our purchases and made tea, 1/3 black and 2/3 herbs and berries, a fragrant selection bought from Eddie, a perky old man who traded not only with the locals but also at the market on weekends. Edie was probably the second person, after Vivian, who treated Maggie really well. The girl had changed into her home clothes, a cozy fleece suit of pants and a hooded sweatshirt, pink in color. Her hair, which had been bundled up for the day, was loose, combed and braided. Her mother had taught her to do that. I corrected the pendant on the gold chain around her neck. It was twisted while she was changing clothes, and squeezed it in her palm for a moment. Only this jewelry I had worn since childhood. Only it, in fact, remained as a reminder of my mother. "Oh, it's already cold," Maggie exclaimed, realizing that she had frozen in the middle of the house, and hurriedly poured tea into a cup, added boiling water, and finally, opening a bag of gingerbread with jam filling, sat down in a cozy old plush armchair. covered her feet with a plaid and opened a book, a new novel from her favorite author, and of course about love. No, Maggie read all sorts of genres, but on days like this, when it was especially nauseating, she wanted something light, with humor, and that necessarily with a happy ending. And also, Maggie didn't even tell Vivian this, but when she read, she always imagined herself in the shoes of the main character. That is, she imagined that she, Maggie from New York, is Stella, Jessica, Angelica, Suzanne, or some other person. Beautiful, so that men would fall at her feet. Strong and independent, but hungry for love, which would surely catch up with her. And once, when Maggie was very young, about 12 years old, she thought that when she grew up, her life would be happy, interesting, and just like in the book. Then, in that happy time, Mommy was still alive, and the curse stain seemed like a small, annoying blemish. Then it was no bigger than a fingernail, and sat above her upper lip on the right side of her face, just as a lady of the gallant age had unsuccessfully tried to draw a fly with pink blush. "Daughter, what are you doing that for?" Ellen exclaimed, finding Maggie with a tube of her foundation. "Mommy, I'm learning how to put on makeup." "Why?" Ellen snatched the cream from her hands. "Isn't it a little early for you? How old are you? And then, I bought you a set of children's cosmetics lip gloss, cherry-scented perfumed water, and shiny shadows." Mom Maggie sighed and her voice shook. I want to hide this," and she jabbed her finger at a spot. Well, what a silly thing to say. Ellen, crouched down beside her daughter Maggie, was sitting on the floor, drenched in the slanting rays of the sun. "It's just a little spot. It doesn't spoil you at all. People have moles, don't they? It's nothing to worry about. Don't give me any ideas. Come on, get up, let's go. Let's go make beet soup, daughter, dinner's coming soon." Maggie really stopped worrying about the stain. She loved her mother very much and trusted her in everything. They lived soul to soul, and when Daddy was alive, everything was wonderful. We lived as a happy family. And then after Maggie lost her father, Mommy died too. The doctors said it happens, one heart failure, and then you're gone. And there was nothing to be done. Grief had entered the house on the eve of a festive, joyous day. Maggie was going to celebrate her coming of age. And now, of course, it was no longer a holiday. What was there to it? Maggie did not understand how to go on living. Thank you, there were kind people. That is, one kind person, Vivian. She took the orphan girl under her wing and helped with everything. And the funeral, and the wake, and then for Maggie, her things collected and took her to her home. Maggie lived there for 2 months, before Vivian decided that the girl, perhaps a little bit hidden her grief deep in the soul, and can safely leave her alone. But even though Vivian was kind and caring, still, with the loss of her mother, something broke in Maggie. And what she'd once had the strength to fight against now came like a tsunami. The stain on her face began to spread when she was 16. It went up and to the side, sliding down, absorbing part of the lip and chin, and poured purple, like a ripe raspberry. There wasn't much money in the little family, but her mother took Maggie to doctors. But those doctors said there was nothing they could do about it. Remove the stain surgically was not possible, lighten in beauty centers. Well, theoretically it was possible, but not to the end, and at such a cost that is unrealistic. Maggie, of course, understood everything. And the people around reminded. People asked what the hell is going on, and also did not hesitate to express their opinions about what an ugly thing it is. And that now, of course, in the future, Maggie will not be attracted to any normal man. But that was the mildest. So shortly before the final exam, someone started a rumor around the school that Maggie is contagious. And what a mess. The principal, the head teacher, and the school nurse were able to calm the students and their parents and convince them that no, Maggie could be among people and would not harm anyone. Naturally, it was impossible to study well in such conditions. And then there was the death of her mother. In general, Maggie finished school and then did not want to think about higher education. No, she'd already decided for herself that she wanted to live quietly and see less people. And the future, prospects. Well, that's for normal people, not for ugly people. And of course, there was a time when Maggie tried to cover up a blemish with makeup. Only there was a problem. The skin in this place was characterized by painful sensitivity, and on all the cosmetics that she tried, her face began to burn and bake. It itched, and even the rash went to the neck and arms. And then Maggie decided that's it, enough. Apparently. Fate? The universe? Some kind of evil fate. Whoever and whatever was behind all this, I guess it was her destiny to live her whole life as a freak. Good morning. Vivian was in her usual good mood. It would have been annoying for any other person, but Maggie was used to it, and even thought secretly that Vivian was like a battery for her. She didn't let her fall into despondency when it was really hard. After saying hello, Maggie went to the back of the room to sort through the new arrival of books. Vivian and the head of the library went along with her without any special requests. Understanding everything, Maggie never checked out books. She worked in the bowels of the institution, putting everything in its place, entering it into catalogs, putting things in order, sometimes fixing wrinkled books. In general, she had enough to do. Vacation's coming up, Vivian said at lunchtime. Maybe we could go away together, huh? Not far. It will be inexpensive, she continued in a soft, delicate tone, and comfortable for you. Vivian thought it was a catastrophic problem that Maggie was locked up at home on weekends and vacations. Yes, the salary of the librarian was not great, but it was possible, for example, at least in a sanatorium for a short time to get out, or, for example, to go on a hike in the picturesque places. Only Maggie was as stubborn as a bull. A donkey, a tour, and even as stubborn as she could, it seems, only she alone. I'd like to go to Venice for the carnival, she said thoughtfully. Yes, Vivian looked up. So you are interested in the culture of Italy? That's right. They have a wonderful cuisine, and the history of Venice's canals. Because they wear masks at carnival, Maggie said with grim amusement. Oh, come on, girl. Her colleague clinked her cup against the saucer with emotion. You can't do that. You can't throw your life away. I understand, she sighed and continued, calmer. It's not easy, but you can't despair. You're going to be happy. Let yourself go out into the world and take your place in it. Maggie shrugged, and for the rest of the lunch hour they were both silent. I'd like that, she said suddenly, turning to Vivian, a stack of novels under her chin. Only. There are no miracles in life. It was 30 minutes till the library closed. Maggie. Vivian shouted, throwing on her beige coat. Will you close it yourself tonight? I have to go home. It's urgent. The plumber's coming. The kitchen's about to burst. He's coming from the district center. All the parts I need, everything. In general, it's very necessary. You go. Don't worry, Maggie said from behind a rack of history books. I'll close it, you go. She was already closing the library herself. It was no big deal. But then the door slammed. Maggie thought that Vivian must have forgotten something. But she would have said a word. She was a talker. And there was silence. Maggie looked out from the back of the room. A late visitor? Not a tidy man. He'd left the door open. And it was raining again outside with hail. Having slammed the door and thinking that maybe it was the children playing around, Maggie went back. It remained to put a couple of books on the shelf and she could leave. But suddenly she froze. A black shadow flashed at the edge of her field of vision. Had she imagined it? Vivian had turned out almost all the lights in the library when she left. Maggie frowned, snickering. What nonsense. She's the only one here. And as if on purpose in refutation of that thought, there was a rustling behind her. Who's there? The dark shadow again, now at her side and slightly ahead. It seemed to move in circles around the lonely librarian. Excuse me, we're just closing up, Maggie shouted into the gloom in a shaky, cheerful voice. What did you want? She froze again. She held her breath. Quiet. Empty. Only the creaking of an old tree somewhere out there, Vivian joked. Lived rats who spent their nights reading books on witchcraft and sorcery, hoping to gain power and enslave the village. Nonsense. A deep inhale and exhale. Slowly inhale and exhale. She's alone. It's okay. Maggie turned to walk to the wall, turn out the lights and leave, locking the library. But then the black spot jumped out from behind the shelving unit in front of her. And in the middle of it was a milky whiteness, which was the old woman's face, riddled with deep wrinkles, with deep-set eyes and a hooked nose. The mouth, which seemed to have no lips at all, opened, giving Maggie a warm, moist breath. I need you. I found you. Swap child, I found you. I need you. Maggie had never seen a horror movie. She never read scary books. She was generally averse to anything scary. Vivian once joked that modern man should not be afraid of scary movies. They help to bear all sorts of bad things in life. Because after you looked at the monster from the depths of the caves, which ate half the city, why should you shake, say, from an overdue payment on your loan? But Maggie disagreed with her. And now, perhaps, she thought, was Vivian right about something? Because, well, really, it's just some old stranger dressed in black who sneaked into the library and pounces with incomprehensible cries. What's there to be afraid of? She was scared. How weak. Her heart skipped a beat. Her legs felt like cotton. And Maggie fainted. Maggie? Maggie? Come on, the familiar voice above her was full of concern. You can't do that, girl. You've got to do something, you know. What should I do, splash you with cold water? Or call a paramedic, huh? Maggie opened her eyes. The wooden ceiling swayed above her, but immediately returned to stability. Her back was stiff from lying on the bench, and it was hard to breathe. The chain of her pendant seemed to be twisted again under her sweater. Oh, she was squirming, so it was not paralysis that broke her with fear. Well, what have you achieved, old witch? I told you. It's no good. That's how it is. Going for the girl. Maggie looked at the speaker and was surprised to find herself somehow transported from the library to Edie's grandfather's house. You're heavy, he informed her, as if he'd read her mind. I had to carry it. Well, what was I supposed to do? I couldn't stay there. The library was supposed to be closed, and it would have been awkward, a place for books, silence, science. Edie put his index finger up. And not for all the fainting and debating. What kind of debriefing? The speech came through a cotton blanket, so Maggie only grasped the last of it. The old witch of flight. You're sorry, Lexi, for making cruel jokes, but how did you behave, huh? Impossible. Disgraced me, an old man. I mean, I sheltered you. Edie replied and nodded to the side. Maggie now only noticed that besides them there was a third person in the room. That old woman. Sheesh. The old man jumped up to Maggie and took her gently by the shoulder. You're going to fall again, and I'll have to lift you up again, won't I? You take it easy, dear. I'm sorry, Maggie sat up gingerly, and she still didn't understand what was happening. No, Grandpa Edie himself was well known to her. A lonely old man, about 100 years retired, he lived quietly, a kind of local hermit. However, it was known that Edie had a son and a grandson in the big city, and they were doing well. They called the old man to them, offered to place him in a comfortable, modern nursing home. But Edie flatly refused and stayed in the village. And somehow, he lived strong, fast, despite all the diagnoses from doctors. He kept a flock of goats with strange, long ears and a few sheep. A local man helped to take care of the livestock. From the milk, Edie brewed amazingly tasty delicacy cheese, which almost all went to the market, and of course the local table. In addition, in his time, grandfather went to the forest. He alone knew their special, generous mushroom and berry places, and also collected herbs for tea, and all this also sold a little bit. The mysterious old woman in black sat on a chair at the side and was looking through something in her hands. Maggie squinted. It was beads of colorful stones. Her favorite beads, the old man said thoughtfully. I once gave it to her for her birthday. Grandpa Edie, Maggie said timidly. Who's that? Oh, the old man waved his hand, smiled awkwardly, looked at them both in turn, chewed his lip. Well, first of all, I'll tell you what, don't be scared of her. Lexi, she's a harmless character. She's my, let's say, longtime acquaintance here. Really? I didn't invite her to visit in any way, and I wasn't expecting her at all. But she just showed up. Well, as if from under the ground. I already talked to her. Why did you come here? And she, I'm sorry, old man, I didn't see it coming. She rushed to you. Me. Maggie frowned, rubbing the back of her head, where a lump was forming. Don't ask me questions, I'm shocked. Edie waved his hands, and Maggie realized from the look on his face that he was totally confused about that part of the story. Lexi? Edie called quietly to the old woman. Lexi, my dear, kindly, can't we talk? And that, Maggie isn't mad at you for scaring her. I'm really not mad, Maggie added hurriedly. It's just that you just showed up out of the blue. A lost child, said the old woman. She raised her head, gazed with her eyes, opened her mouth to say something, and suddenly relaxed again. Her shoulders slumped. Her head hung down, her fingers slipping, searching through the beads. Those were her words that started it all. Edie sighed. I wondered what she was up to. He looked at Maggie in a strange, guilty way. She was babbling about some child, but who? You'd never know it. And then, when I brought her to me, and we sat down to talk, the old man scratched his short, bushy beard, which had not had a single dark hair in it for 20 years. Grandpa Edie. Maggie stood up, stretching. She was feeling better. But Grandpa Edie didn't seem to be doing so well. He was very pale. Would you like some tea? You're right, said the landlord. You've been on your feet all morning. I thought to rest. I was coming out of the forest and I saw this one walking along the road. She was walking like that. I could feel that she was very tired. What road? Maggie asked. The one to the bus stop? No, the one that goes through the grove to the former state farm and turns there. Well, it's also the road that the dacha owners often use to get to the community. So I think Edie squinted. Either someone gave her a ride, or she was coming from the district center, and she could have come there by electric train or some other transport. Only as I know from the last one, Lexi didn't live in the city, in this million-strong city, but far away from here. Does she have any relatives? I don't want to say anything offensive, Maggie suggested cautiously. But don't you think she has mental problems? Did you say that in scientific language? Edie grinned. You mean about Lexi being stupid? Yeah, that's a thing. But I've been through something like that. You'd have to try to stay sane after that. Edie was silent again, looking at Maggie strangely again. What happened? Maggie asked, and the next moment she almost shrieked, because the old woman had moved closer, sat down at the table, and reached for a cup of newly brewed tea. She took a sip, nibbling. She looked at the girl attentively, shook her head. How about some jam, Lexi? Edie asked. There's strawberry jam. Come on, said Grandma. I'm a little fuzzy in my head. I'm sorry if I've offended anyone, but only. Oh, all right. Suddenly she waved her hand, and her voice sounded clear, and it seemed that she was in good order mentally. Apparently you don't believe me either. Nobody believes me. And I found you, didn't I? And she jabbed her finger at Maggie again. Don't worry, Lexi, Edie said. Don't worry. It's all yours and we'll figure it out. Let's have some tea for now. And I'll tell Maggie our story first, if you don't mind, okay? He waited for a while. Silence is a sign of agreement, Edie proclaimed, and then he spoke. Talking about his past, mixing it with what Lexi had told him earlier. And he warned Maggie that in order to make sense of it all, he'd have to go back to the distant past first. At that time, Edie had been some young, Zealand 20-something years old. He had such a temper that he couldn't sit in the village. He wanted to go to the city for big dreams, fresh impressions, some grandiose accomplishments. His parents, ordinary laborers who had devoted their whole life to the land, did not quite understand their only son, but they did not try to stop him. A man is looking for his way, so no stepping stones, just wish him luck. Edie entered a construction technical school, but already in the second year he started working with his hands thanks to science from his grandfather, who was a master of wood and taught him how to handle it so that the beauty came out of any piece, even from a small twig. The fame of Edie's skill spread like a nightingale's song in the spring, and soon he was invited to join a team that was building a summer house for a big man named Alex Grace. And this dacha was not one of those where people go on weekends to plant potatoes and fry kebabs, although theoretically it was possible to do that here too. But first of all, this dacha was planned as a place of almost year-round residence for Alex's wife Judy, and for his son Ben, who, like his mother, suffered from agonizing asthma attacks. And so, as the doctors advised to spend more time outdoors, such attention was paid to the cottage. This work Edie liked. Alex paid generously and said simply, "Make it beautiful. I want to make my wife and son happy." And Edie was happy to try. He covered the railings, windowsills, and everything else he could with skillful carvings. But he also did not forget about the future. He treated it with the right compounds, so that neither bugs, nor dampness, nor time were not afraid of wood. Well, in general, so that in the future Alex's grandchildren and great-grandchildren could enjoy the dacha. The work was going fast and, as they say, with a song. And also the further, the more Edie wanted to sing, not just for fun, but for one particular person. Her name was Lexi, and she was a personal assistant and babysitter to little Ben. The statuesque blonde Lexi was so good, but also strikingly silent and sad. Eddie, however, who had never failed in life, decided that he would get her attention. "Don't try," Lexi said one day when he brought her the first strawberry from a nearby forest. "You're a good guy, but we'll never be together." "Why not?" Edie was taken aback. There was something about Lexi's tone that he didn't like. Oh, he didn't like it. "I'm a curse," she replied. "What?" Edie was taken aback. "What kind of prejudice and superstition is that? It's not Soviet, you know." "I'm cursed," Lexi repeated stubbornly. "My grandfather, a fist, drove away a worker. She was in a heavy situation. She starved to death. That's when my family was cursed. Women can't bear children, and some are barren. I am barren, maybe." She looked adoringly at Ben, who was playing in a sandbox under a red mushroom hat canopy. "Since I won't have children of my own, I can at least be a babysitter for this family." Later, Edie repeatedly told himself that, no, he didn't believe in the curse. He wasn't stupid, and it wasn't because he'd given up on Lexi because she couldn't have kids. He decided that they just couldn't be together. They wouldn't get along in the end. However, Edie decided they could and should be friends. Lexi didn't mind that at all, by the way. The work on the cottage dragged on until the late fall. Edie, back home, did not miss Lexi and soon got married. His chosen one was the daughter of the neighbors, and as it turned out, parents from both sides had long ago agreed that it would be good to marry the children. However, the joys of young family life did not prevent Edie from remembering Lexi, and they corresponded. True, Edie's wife, when she learned about this friendship, at first she was jealous, of course, what kind of friends her beloved husband could have. But in time she realized that Lexi was not dangerous. Time flew by. Sometimes Edie, his wife Sophia, and Lexi even met and had a good time together. And it also turned out that Lexi could give 1,000 valuable tips to a young mom and help to get scarce and even imported things for the baby. Edie had a son. Time flew on. Lexi, as she once said, never married, devoting herself to taking care of Ben. And even as he grew older, well, she somehow stayed in the family. Who else would want me? That's how Lexi explained her situation. And when my master Ben gets married, when he has kids, I'll be useful. Yes, Lexi called Ben that, and even more so, her father, and repeated that the meaning of her life was in faithful service to these people. Edie felt sorry for her, because he reasoned that it was a very good thing when a person was faithful, when they were willing to help. That it's good when a person melds his or her soul with loved ones, and it doesn't matter whether they are relatives by blood or by mutual decision. But at the same time, oh, how unkind, dangerous it is to dissolve into the lives of other people. It's not long to lose yourself. In the meantime, life went on as usual, and one day Lexi sent a happy message. Ben decided to get married, but the choice of the chosen one worried Lexi. And the thing was this, it was the 90s and a lot, oh how much, had changed. Alex Grace had transformed from the director of a large department store into a successful businessman and was preparing a great future for his son. And Ben, young and rebellious, decided to fall in love with a girl from a dysfunctional family. His father resented him, saying, how could it be so? There are girls from good families. Business partners have already seen several brides. Choose anyone. Everyone will go, will throw their arms around you. But Ben did not yield to his father's stubbornness and said firmly that he would marry Peggy, and then he could do whatever he wanted. I don't care if they disinherit him. I don't care if they kick him out of the house. But Alex Grace was not going to go to such extreme measures. He waved his hand and accepted his daughter-in-law, and even as Lexi reported, he treated her well. But then, first it became clear that Ben had grown cold to his young wife over time and started looking at other women. And secondly, it turned out that Alex had an insidious, cruel plan. It was that he had found out something about Peggy's past. It turned out that she was moonlighting in a very ancient, shameless profession. And Alex, when he found out about it, at first he was horrified. And then he realized that the folk wisdom that there was no happiness, but misfortune helped. Lexi led an isolated life under her masters, and only Edie in her numerous letters could pour out her thoughts and worries. And now letters flew to him, in which she told about everything that was happening in the family. Alex gave an order to his lawyers: prepare whatever tricky moves you want. And as soon as the heir is born, it should be arranged so that Peggy would be thrown out of Grace's family. Divorce, termination of parental rights, and bonus, she could be committed to a mental institution. Lexi was torn about what to do. On the one hand, she had sworn to herself to be loyal to the family of her masters, and on the other hand, she felt so sorry for Peggy. She was basically a good girl. And as for the call girl thing, yes, it had happened. But Peggy only did it because her brother needed expensive treatment. She wanted to take him abroad for surgery. The brother, by the way, died anyway. Edie was in shock and didn't know what to say to his friend. He was afraid to advise anything. After all, he had nothing to do with it. So he only asked Lexi to be careful. And so Lexi made a decision. She told Peggy everything, and together they decided that she should run away before the birth. Far away to relatives very far away. They quietly packed their things, a little cash. Peggy took one of the family cars and one day secretly left the mansion. And that's when the worst happened. Peggy was speeding down the highway. It was raining. She'd calculated everything. She was still 2 weeks away from giving birth. She had to make it. But she must have been stressed. She felt bad. And then, on the side of the road, Peggy suddenly noticed a frail figure. And she slowed down because it was a girl, just like her, with a big belly. She introduced herself as Helen and said that she was in trouble. Her husband, Pete, wanted to drive her to town, but the car had stalled halfway there. And it was very necessary to go to town. Just today she could see a very good doctor. There he is. Ellen waved in the direction, where by the roadside stood a Ziguli, under the hood of which her husband was digging. He, by the way, noticing that the car was ready to pick up his unlucky passenger, came closer and looked inside the cabin. He nodded approvingly. "It's good that you're a woman," he said. "I wouldn't let Ellen go with a strange man." "So maybe I could give you a ride, too?" Peggy asked. "How am I going to leave the car?" Freddie shrugged his shoulders. "It doesn't seem to be a very big breakdown. I'll get it fixed soon and come and pick up my wife from the clinic." Peggy shrugged. Well, that was a sensible decision. She thought that she would drive Helen to the clinic, and then she would go on her own away from the city, farther and farther away. Then she would take the train. She would go to the Far East, where her relatives lived. Helene hugged her husband tightly, kissed him goodbye, sat down on the front passenger seat, and off we went. Oh, road work. Helene was upset. "Do you know if there is a way around here?" "Yes, there is," nodded Peggy. "There are 2 roads. But the shorter one is often used by big trucks." "Well, maybe we should take the longer one," Ellen said uncertainly. "Can we make it to 4, do you think?" "We will." Peggy nodded. Meanwhile, the rain was getting heavier. It was late fall, and the first snow was falling from the low, slate-black clouds. This second road was really freer. It was not used much at all. Part of it ran through the woods. And then suddenly Peggy was twisted with pain. "What's the matter with you?" Ellen exclaimed. "Is it the baby?" I don't know," whispered Peggy. "Oh, Mommy, it's starting, I think." And apparently at this moment it would be necessary to stop the car. But Peggy did not have time to do it. And also the road was slippery from the rain. And suddenly everything turned upside down, and literally the car shook, drove, and then it flew down the road into the ravine. How much time passed then? How many tens of minutes passed in an agonizing pain and fear-filled nightmare? They were found. Help had arrived. Alex Grace was no fool and quickly realized that his sister-in-law would not have left so easily on some routine errand of her own, so early in the morning, without alerting anyone in the family. And it came out that if it hadn't been for the pursuit of the father-in-law, Peggy would not have been saved, nor her traveling companion, nor the baby, one of the 2 babies born. Yes, the baby was born there, guided into this world only by the love of her mother, who, barely hanging on the verge of fainting after the disaster, but managed to muster the strength to give her life. But the second child that Peggy had carried under her heart just a few hours ago did not survive. Alex Grace, when he realized this, was just in shock. He felt as if he had lost his heart. How could it be? His granddaughter, a tiny baby girl, his son's daughter. It was impossible. It was wrong. It shouldn't have happened in his personal world, where money and power allowed him to get everything he once dreamed of. And suddenly, willfully, he lost his granddaughter. "We are doing everything we can," said the doctor of a very expensive private clinic, to which the injured women were taken, in a trembling voice. "But I'm afraid that your daughter-in-law—" "I don't give a damn about her." Alex Grace roared and slammed his fist into the wall with all his might, knocking down the expensive Venetian plaster that lined the visitor's lobby, shattering his knuckles. "Fool," he growled. "Stupid bitch. Let her die for all I care. I lost my granddaughter because of her. I don't care what happens to her." But the doctors, of course, were fighting for Peggy's life because despite the anger, the hatred that was eating away at his soul like rusting metal, Mr. Grace had paid the clinic generously to do what they could for Peggy, and for her traveling companion and the baby she'd given birth to. Not 24 hours after that terrible car accident, Peggy passed away. Faithful Lexi was by her side to the last, and so was Ben. True, already at the end, Peggy said she wanted to talk privately with Lexi. As for Peggy's parents, they were far away at that time. They had gone on a vacation on a trip and physically couldn't get there in time. Andy couldn't bring himself to enter the room. Not to his sister-in-law, not to that other young woman. He stood at the door of Ellen's room and frowned, pondering. Was this what fate had ordained? If Peggy hadn't picked up a hitchhiker, maybe she wouldn't have gotten into the accident either. Maybe. "Can I give her something from you?" the nurse asked timidly. No, Andy shook his head. "Keep her here as long as she needs for her health, and then, no, let her get the hell out of here with her offspring. I have nothing to do with this. Not anymore." Lexi had told Edie in one of her last letters how it all went down about Peggy trying to run away, about the accident, about how she had lost the baby and died soon after. These last letters of Lexi's were riddled with bitter guilt. The faithful maid of Grace's family felt guilty. She thought now that she should have thought of some other way to help Peggy instead of this running away. Then everything would be okay. And then Lexi showed up on Edie's doorstep, and he didn't recognize her at first. Clad in black, it was as if her face had aged 10 years. Looking away and stammering, confused in her own speech, Lexi told him that she couldn't take it anymore. She couldn't stay in the family she had spent so many years in, because she hadn't kept Peggy and her child safe. She's let everyone down. "It's not your fault," Edie said firmly. "If my father-in-law hadn't been up to it, why would Paula have run away in the first place? He's the one, the bastard." "I don't care. I'm leaving," Lexi sighed. "And where are you going?" Edie asked, confused. "I have relatives. They live far away," Lexi mumbled. "They have a cabin in the taiga. They'll take me in there. And you. I'm sorry, Edie, but I won't write letters often anymore. Forgive me. Forgive me for everything." Well, Edie felt more embarrassed than ever before in his life. "You're certainly not guilty of anything in front of me." His wife also showed sympathy. She tried to convince Lexi not to make hasty decisions, advised her to find a psychologist. But she went away after a couple of days. When the old man was silent, Maggie sighed convulsively and shuddered as if a bee had stung her, blinked often. What a horrible, sad story. But there was something in it that was particularly important to her personally. That fellow traveler. Her name was Helene, she whispered. No, I was wrong, wasn't I? But Lexi told her. She had blonde hair. And also, it happened in September? The baby was born in the fall month. The old woman struggled to say the exact date. But it's my birthday. Maggie gasped and put her palm over her mouth. But Mama, she never told me about it. I only knew I was born prematurely. So that's why she doesn't like to remember that time so much. Edie reached out and closed his fingers around her wrist, almost painfully. So this isn't the end of the story. How? Why? What else do I need to know? Maggie exhaled heavily. It was so strange. She felt as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice over which a thin, ephemeral, almost bridge had been thrown, and she had to walk across it, but almost certainly risked falling off. But she had to keep moving forward. Lexi. We hadn't seen each other in years. Letters. Well, she sent a card or two a year. "Happy New Year and my birthday," Edie said. So usually, politely, nothing personal. And then, lo and behold, today she came. She showed up in person, after all these years. Said she couldn't keep quiet anymore. She said that she lied to me. She lied to everyone, but now she can't keep quiet anymore. And what was the lie about? Maggie asked in a colorless voice, turning her gaze to the old woman. She was sitting with her fingers interlocked and looking straight into the girl's eyes. "Lexi," Edie exclaimed, standing up abruptly from the table. "Well, what are you doing, huh? That's right, I've always been your friend and still am. Only. That's it. I can't take it anymore. Go on, you tell me." And he waved his hand. "I can't hear it a second time. Excuse me, I'll just sit on the porch, okay?" And with these words, the old man ran out of the house. The antique wall clock ticked quietly. Somewhere inside Maggie was squirming with an irresistible urge to follow Edie's example and run away. Just for good. It was as if her intuition was screaming at her, "Now you don't need to know what that old woman in black is going to say." And her mind was telling her that it would be nonsense, just nonsense, because, well, look, that old woman, she's crazy, you can tell. But only. On some other unknowable deep level, Maggie realized that everything she was about to hear would be the truth. And so the old woman in black spoke. Then, holding the fading Peggy's hand, Lexi was unwittingly privy to her secret. It turned out that before help arrived, Peggy had made a decision. Not an easy one, but she thought the right one for her. The thing was that even before the accident, while driving and chatting as if about nothing with a fellow traveler, Peggy was suddenly pierced by a pang of white envy. She thought that this young woman will surely become a wonderful mother. And her husband seemed to be a good man. Ellen's baby was stillborn. Peggy's baby was barely audible, but the girl was alive. And then, in a few moments, when the sound of cars in the distance, it was help on its way, Peggy made up her mind. Take my daughter," she whispered, holding out her baby girl to Ellen. Ellen's eyes widened. She had not yet recovered from the shock. Her mind had not yet fully internalized the terrible truth about the loss of her baby. But she listened and heard. Peggy, gasping for breath, only by force of will to keep consciousness, said that her father-in-law, a terrible, cruel man. That the child she gave birth to would not be loved, that it would be brought up by nannies, and then Ben would probably remarry, and perhaps that woman would become a cruel stepmother to the child, not a mother. "You're good," whispered Peggy, coughing harshly. "Please take her. Let her be your daughter. No one will notice. The switch. Raise her as your own. She is your own, already." The heart-wrenching pain of losing her child was mixed in Ellen's mind with sympathy for this casual acquaintance. But decisive was the moment when the girl slipped into her arms from the weakening arms of her true mother. Very weak, so small. She opened her eyes so transparent, like shards of winter sky, and weakly squeaked. And then Helene cried and nodded. "What's her name?" she asked. "What should I call her?" Peggy breathed out and fainted. The next thing they knew, help was rushing around the machine. People talking about how to open the doors safely and get the victims out. But Peggy didn't want to, couldn't go to the other side without revealing this truth to the one person she trusted most in the world, Lexi. She said there had to be someone to know, just in case this knowledge might come in handy for Maggie one day. But she made Lexi swear not to tell anyone unless it was absolutely necessary. And Lexi. Oh, how hard it was for her. Bound by that vow and at the same time driven by obligations to the family she had served all her life, she just didn't know what to think, what to do. And so she decided to go away altogether. It seemed to her that it would bring peace to her heart. It would save her from agonizing thoughts about whether she was right to keep this secret. And the years flew by. Lexi kept her word. And then, she herself explained it this way: bad dreams began to visit her lately. And it seemed that the time was coming when the truth would be revealed. Lexi had little to no contact with Grace's family, so barely knew about what was going on with them. But now, just 3 months ago, news came that confirmed her strange dreams and premonitions. It was time to act. Alex Grace had long since passed away. His son, Ben, had been married twice more, and each union ended in a high-profile scandal infidelity on the part of the wives. And Ben also had health problems. Not quite bad, but doctors recommended caution. And the family lawyer directly said that with such a heart it is better to make a will in advance. But to whom? There were no heirs. And then Ben decided that for the simplicity of the matter, he would transfer his property, the lion's share of it, including controlling stakes in several companies, to one person. His name was Taylor, and he had been his faithful assistant for over 5 years. Ben planned to spend the rest on charity. That's it, girl Lexi finished her story with a sigh. Maggie sat there, not feeling herself and barely aware of herself in space and reality at all. There were too many thoughts, and at the same time it seemed that in the head, in the heart, a strange emptiness settled. "Maggie, are you all right?" Edie, who had already returned to the house at the end of the story, called her gently. I told her to take her time, but she was in a hurry. Probably because she had been looking for you and Ellen's daughter for a long time. She was afraid she wouldn't find you, so she got nervous and hurried. "I'm sorry? Did you dump it quickly?" The girl replied in a colorless voice and looked at Edie in such a way that he flinched. "You." Maggie struggled to speak, her hysteria choking her. She stood up. She stretched out her hand and jabbed her finger at the old woman, who, as if her battery had run out, the battery she had used up on her story had sunk back into herself and was quietly fiddling with her beads. "You've been my whole life. My mother. I'm not her kin, am I? No, it's not true. I don't believe it." I didn't believe it either, Edie sighed. "Only Lexi doesn't have a habit of lying, and she's crazy," Maggie shouted. "No, I don't believe it. None of this is true." Except that with each spouted denial, there was a growing, hard realization inside her, some instinctual realization that this could all be true. Without proof. It's just the way it is. It's a fact. Like the fact that the sun shines during the day except on a polar night. "Maggie, I'm sorry, I wouldn't even go near you with all this. Would you believe it?" Edie pounded his chest with his gaunt fist. "But she did, didn't she? Didn't she run? Well, what else was there to do, huh?" "You're a fool, I know. I lied, not thinking that you work in our library." "No, why? Why did she tell me all this?" The realization of a new meaning hit me like a storm. "Aha," Maggie exclaimed. "What does she think I want? An inheritance? That I need money?" "Well," Edie coughed. "Lexi told me that she was old, that she was afraid she'd die with her. And about the money, yeah, what's the big deal, Maggie, huh? Money means something too since you're born with it. Grace, he's a rich man. I had a mom and dad, real ones, my own. I don't want no other." Maggie inhaled convulsively, biting her lip painfully. "And I don't want money. And I know I don't want to hear any more." And she rushed out of the house. The hay door slammed, then the front door, then the wicket door a moment later. Edie shook his head. "What are we going to do? Lexi, honey, huh? Where am I supposed to put you? Maybe you could whisper an address, the phone number of your relatives, so they could take you away." But the old woman answered nothing. Smiling, she was looking through the beads and thinking about her own. ... A persistent knock on the door woke Maggie. The girl craned her neck and grimaced as she lay down on the sofa for a minute and fell asleep until morning. Or rather, until the day the clock showed a quarter to an hour. I had never slept so long. My nose was deaf, I'd been crying, and my eyes were swollen. "Maggie, are you home?" Vivian's insistent voice could be heard outside the window now, and Maggie, pulling open the tulle curtains, hurried to open it. "Why haven't you gone to work?" Vivian broke off, perceiving by the look on her young friend's face that she was not well. "What's wrong?" asked the logical question. Maggie shrugged and sniffed noisily, urgently needed to go to the bathroom. "I'll be right there." "Yeah," Vivian snorted. "Unlock the door and we'll deal with this together." Shrugging again, Maggie let her in. Somehow I felt so indifferent to everything. Who insulted her? Was Kolka joking again? Oh, he'll fly into the burdocks, I'll give him a kicking. Vivian grumbled, following Maggie's footsteps. Come on, tell me what happened. Or is it personal? Personal. Maggie gurgled from under the cold running water. I'm fine, really. It's just tired. Vivian was about to say that she knew her too well to believe her, but there was another knock at the door. Maggie, help me. Trouble. Edie's voice was ringing with alarm. Okay, Vivian squinted and went to open the door. What kind of day is this? What other surprises would it hold? Lexi's missing. Edie hooted like a frightened owl. Kidnapped. Okay, Vivian said. Who is Lexi, and since when do people get kidnapped in New York? Or did you get a new goat and call her that? Well, I don't envy the one who's been trespassing on your livestock. Maggie was very angry, hurt, shocked at what she'd been told. But first of all, it wasn't Edie's fault he hadn't started it. And secondly, the negativity receded when she realized that the defenseless, and not quite in herself old woman was in trouble. Even if it is not clear yet in what kind of trouble. Who kidnapped her? What happened? Maggie wiped her face with a towel, sat Edie on a stool, and handed the old man a cup of water. I don't know. He came. In a black car, he said. Oh, I can't, my heart. Vivian, please give me the first aid kit. In the closet, top shelf on the left, Maggie asked. Who is Lexi, and what's going on here? She asked, handing over what she needed. Edie, having drunk the healing drops, finally got his breath back and started talking. He hadn't managed to ask Lexi about her family that evening and decided to postpone it for the morning. In the morning, as was his custom, he thought he would have breakfast outdoors. He took Lexi out too, sat her at the table, poured tea. I went to get some eggs, and as soon as I came out with the frying pan, I saw this guy in black putting her in a black car. She was waving her hands, squeaking something, and he grabbed her and shoved her inside. Well, I went to him. I dropped the rag and oven mitt. I swung the frying pan at him, saying, "Don't touch the old woman." And he said, "Stay out of it. Old man, it's none of your business." I'll take care of her, like Taylor said, and that was it. Eddie looked down at his trembling hands. The frying pan burns on the fingers of his right hand. And then there's Tommy. What's the neighbor's dog got to do with it? Vanessa rounded her eyes. And I repeat, who is Lexi? Tommy ate the eggs, Edie explained grimly. Maggie, having quickly found the ointment for burns in the medicine cabinet, was already putting a bandage on the old man's arm. I wish Lexi had had a chance to try my scrambled eggs. Delicious, with red onions and paprika. By the way, I didn't eat breakfast today. I didn't even drink coffee, Vivian said thoughtfully, more to herself. I thought I'd go on a diet. I've deprived myself of the gastronomic joy of life for nothing. With this kind of business, with you guys, you're going to miss lunch. Lexi, this is Edie's old friend. A good friend, Maggie said. She showed up in the village yesterday and then she found me. Vivian, don't just stand there, okay? There, make yourself some tea. I've got some stuffed cabbage left over from last night's lunch. You take it and eat it. Grandpa Edie, you calm down. No. Okay. Let's think together. Maybe Lexi's relatives have come for her? Edie hummed, chewed his lips, stared at the ceiling for a moment, as if the answers could be spelled out there. No, she'd told them she'd gone to a sanitarium. She could lie when she had to. But, oh, I remember. Edie exclaimed so loudly that Vivian, who had actually gone for the stuffed cabbage, almost dropped the dish. Taylor. That's Ben's heir. But how did he? Why would he do that? I guess no one will ever explain to me what's going on here, Vivian complained sadly. Maggie sighed. If she'd hoped to get away from everything tonight, to take a break, she'd been wrong. Let's get to the table, she invited Edie. You haven't had breakfast either. Let's talk over breakfast, shall we? And I'll tell it like it is, she smiled sadly at Vivian. Vivian listened to the whole story with great attention, but that did not prevent her from cleaning her plate as diligently as before and taking a refill. Oh, Oh, Maggie. The older friend was almost crying herself. To know such a thing. How could it be? Is everyone sure? Unless Lexi is suffering from a mental breakdown, it's for sure, Maggie nodded. But that doesn't change anything for me. I only have one mom. And there's only one father. And I don't want anything. I'm not going to go and fight for the inheritance. That's right, Vivian nodded. But still, your father. Ben, he's your own father. By blood. And I think it's unfair and cruel to stay here and not say anything. Supporting Lexi's lie, even if it was originally, like, for good. Although, Vivian slapped her palm on the table indignantly. We can't say for sure how things would have been if you'd stayed with Grace's family, can we? Maybe Grandpa would have loved his granddaughter and Ben would have been a wonderful father. So, I guess it's just a matter of dealing with it all. And help Lexi out, of course. And how do we do that? Maggie waved her hands. I can't. You can. Vivian interrupted her. Yes, you can and you should. Time off from work now. It's a family emergency. I'll talk to our superintendent right away. And by the way, I'll go with you. I'm supposed to start my vacation tomorrow. So, as much as possible, while everything is going well? What about me? Grandpa Edie asked resentfully. Lexi is my friend. No one's arguing that. Vivian nodded. But I think that 3 of us going to the city for her is too much. And then, no offense, but your age. And goats. You refuse to go to the hospital because you have no one to leave the animals on. So I'm going to go with Maggie and me. Just tell us everything you know again, okay? The addresses, where to find Taylor, I think we can find them on the internet. Vivian said with an important smile, pulling out a brand new smartphone in a glamorous pink case and opening a browser. Maggie felt like a little girl who had been swept up by a whirlwind, lifted into the sky, and was being dragged and carried somewhere. Events were moving so fast. 1, to write a statement to the head of the library. 2, to collect a minimum of things in a travel bag. 3, once again, the 3 of us discussed a plan of action. 4, turn off all appliances in the house, lock the door and windows. 5, she and Vivian are already on the bus to the city. Maggie fussed and almost ran, but Vivian grabbed her arm just in time. What are you doing? Panic attack, she asked her friend seriously. Come on, breathe. Inhale and exhale calmly, inhale and exhale. No, Maggie squeaked, lowering her head. She had felt it from the very beginning, since they had come to town, the curious, sympathetic, and even unpleasant looks of the people around her. But in the village, she had gotten so used to the general bad attitude that somehow she didn't pay attention. But now, when they were standing in front of a shining tower of glass and concrete, a business center, many floors of which were occupied by the office of the corporation owned by Mr. Gray's, she suddenly realized furiously, piercingly, she has such a thing with her face. A panicked urge to cancel the whole thing. Or at least postpone. I should have worn makeup, Maggie sniffed. It would have been less noticeable. You're allergic to makeup, remember? Vivian said sternly. Oh, well, what kind of a fool are you? Nobody's looking at you. That's not true. Everyone does. Because people have eyes. So they look around. And if someone thinks something bad, well, then he's crazy. And you're beautiful and smart. Do you really think that your father will evaluate you like at the Miss World Beauty contest, instead of just being happy that his daughter alive? Only if your daughter is suddenly ugly, Maggie whispered. Maybe we'll do better tomorrow. Aha. Vivian grinned. We've already spent so much on a room for tomorrow that it's scary. No way. And besides, we're here for Lexi too. Why would they want her? Don't be so shy. Come on, cheer up, keep your head up, don't slouch and smile. Let's go. And Vivian, holding Maggie's hand tightly, headed for the sparkling, clear, clean, revolving door to the business center. The girl at the reception desk downstairs was asked what floor, and passed into the elevator, which lifted swiftly and easily. The doors opened. Are you signed in? Another girl at the reception desk, but now at the office of Gray's firm, asked a question while looking at the computer. No, Vivian answered importantly. We're here to see Taylor, but we have a very important case. I'm sorry, but Taylor only sees appointments or top-level employees of the company, she chirped with stoic politeness. Vivian was not used to giving up. Tell him we're here. Tell him we're here for Lexi. He'll know what we're talking about. The girl frowned, obviously wondering if it was time to call security, poked her finger at the computer. Then she sighed and nodded reluctantly. No, look at this, Vivian hissed to a subdued, embarrassed Maggie. They didn't offer a seat, no tea or coffee. Also, what's it called? Corporation, all kinds of elite society. This place clearly needs to work with personnel. The girl returned a minute later, surprised and embarrassed. I apologize. Taylor will see you in her office. She made a gesture with her hand. Straight down the hall, then left. This was the first time this had ever happened to Maggie. She entered the office with the feeling that she and Vivian were going to have a difficult conversation. They needed to find out why Lexi had been taken away so unceremoniously, so rudely, and worst of all, they needed to make a statement. And Maggie still had serious doubts about the necessity of the latter. But when she entered the office, it was as if all these problems, as if they melted into thin air, because she suddenly drowned in the eyes of the man across the hall. It must have lasted a few moments in reality, but for her it lasted many times longer. Taylor turned out to be a stately brunette of 35, with correct, as if chiseled by an ancient Greek master, in his eyes. They were the deep color of a stormy sea, in which the calm shades of indigo and the doldrums had not yet faded. The man was dressed in a dark blue suit to match the color of his eyes, and an off-white shirt, but he wore no tie. Maggie? He addressed her in a strong, velvety voice, but Maggie was numb and only nodded. Taylor? Vivian, who had almost pushed her friend behind her back as if Taylor would attack and bite her, answered for her. Thank you for taking a moment for us. Do you have any idea why we're here? Partly, perhaps, he answered evasively, and his gaze shifted from Maggie to Vivian for the first time. Clinging, piercing, sensitive, but without a shadow of aggression. I'm sorry we're getting to know each other under these circumstances. When you kidnapped a man, Maggie blurted out, even though she didn't mean to be rude. Edie's grandpa's heart nearly gave out. Lexi is the closest thing to him since his dead wife. I apologize, he frowned, but had the tiniest bit of a snide smile playing on his lips. Edie, is this the old man we found Lexi with? I'm afraid my man acted, somewhat, rudely. I apologize, but believe me, the rush was only out of concern for Lexi's mental state. You see, she showed up so suddenly, and then she disappeared. Maggie and Vivian looked at each other. Eddie hadn't mentioned that Lexi had apparently talked to Gorney or anyone else in his entourage before him. Have a seat, please, Taylor gestured invitingly to the sheet chairs across from his desk. Vivian plumped herself into one. Coffee, tea? Suggested the landlord. No, we just want to talk, replied Vivian, sending her younger friend a glance. Don't say anything yet. So, I think I should start by clarifying things a bit. Taylor waved his hand in the air. The situation and explain what I know. Yes, please, Maggie said, noting to herself that in all this time, which was the odd thing, she hadn't noticed anything in Taylor's gaze that somehow suggested that he'd noticed her stain on his face. And that was weird, because people noticed. She was used to it, and just this lack of specific attention, it had a strange effect on Maggie. It was as if 1,000 needles had touched her weightlessly and at the same time like a butterfly's wing. Taylor spoke. It turned out that Lexi, though she had left the Grays family, wanting to cut all ties, had not been forgotten over the years. Andy and then Ben regularly sent her holiday gifts, scarce things, delicacies, and money. They'd called to see if she needed anything, if there was anything they could do to help the people she was now living with. But Lexi stubbornly refused. And then, as time went on, it became clear that something was wrong with her. Her distant family confirmed her suspicions. Lexi was slowly starting to go out of her mind, just like that. But what could Ben do about it? She was one of the quiet crazies, spent almost all her time quietly in the house or in the yard, and that's why no one had ever put her in any clinic for treatment. And then just the other day it happened. It was incomprehensible how Lexi in her condition made it on her own from so far away. But she did, and she went to her old address, the Grays mansion. Ben was happy to see his now very old babysitter, but he was shocked at what she had told him. He didn't want to believe a word of it, but he did. Ben Grays had enough opportunity to start looking for information at once. He had learned that the daughter of the fellow traveler lived in the village, and Ben was going to come and talk to Maggie about everything, and not just talk. He wanted to ask for your consent to a genetic examination, Taylor said, and looked guilty. You do realize that going on the word of someone who's not quite right in the head, well, confirming that story could have some serious repercussions. Aha, Vivian said, and added without delicacy. We agree to that. And then you will realize that Maggie can claim her father's property, not you. Vivian, Maggie exclaimed, her eyes flushing with shame. I'm sorry, she turned to Taylor. I wasn't thinking about the money at all. Because she's a silly, naive girl, sometimes in places. Vivian intervened again. An orphan. Anyone can and does take offense, by the way. Who's hurting you? Taylor asked sternly, and looked at Maggie so hard that she felt her ears burn and wanted to fall through the ground. No one. I'm fine. Vivian, enough, please. After Mother, that's when Mother died. I'm the only one she has, and the others. Vivian waved her hand. In general, I see. Expertise. And when, may I say, should the girl meet her father? Or you won't let her meet the father without your expertise? Let's make something clear. Taylor added metal to his voice. And Maggie was even grateful to him for it, because she herself couldn't calm down her friend, who in her understandable, in general, protective aspirations, went completely apart. Since you yourself appeared here, the plans of course change, and I'm ready to inform Ben about your visit right away. As for Lexi, she's gone. I mean, she said she wanted to take a walk down a street she knew, and naturally. You have to admit, we couldn't lock her up, could we? Especially since she seemed to be quite adequate at the moment. It took a while to find her. Ben was worried sick. I sent a man to bring Lexi back when the detective said where she could be, supposedly. And again, I apologize for the rude behavior of my staff. It won't happen again. So, sighing, Taylor drummed his fingers on the armrests of his massive executive chair. May I continue? And he continued. And Vivian, much to Maggie's relief, remained silent for the time being. Taylor said that Lexi was now at Ben's mansion, that he had a private and very good psychiatrist for her, who would determine what her condition was at the moment, and whether Lexi should not, for her own good, be sent to a private clinic for a while. And then Taylor said that business matters, they could wait, but the fact that Maggie was here. I'd like to report you to Ben. What, right now? Maggie squeaked. Yes, Taylor nodded. Wait a minute. Vivian spoke again. I mean, how does that work? You want my Maggie to come across to this, Ben? IES ... who, excuse me, suspicious and maybe not a daughter. And then he'll look at the test results. No, you let me talk. The woman waved her hand firmly at Maggie's attempt to stop her. I've changed my mind. There's no need to rush this meeting. We'd better do this. How fast are these tests done? Basically, you can get the results in a day, Taylor said after a moment's thought. So we'll wait a day, see you later. We found a place to stay here. And then, when everything is confirmed. If it's confirmed, I'll ask you to consider it, Taylor said, squinting his eyes. Not to be insulting, but I think you should realize that. Aha, Vivian nodded. We do. There are crooks, that's the way life is. So we wait. But then she got up to leave, and squinted her eyes as she did so, as well as Taylor. We'll be doing business with all the rights, won't we? No doubt, Taylor replied with a polite smile. Finally, they said their goodbyes and left. And what a long day it seemed to Maggie, and the next one was even longer. Vivian, as if sensing her condition, didn't talk about serious matters and instead talked about everything. She took Maggie out for a walk in the park. The weather was wonderful. And of course they called Edie's grandfather and reassured him that Lexi was fine. And then, pack up. Vivian told Maggie after she finished talking to Taylor. He's going to pick us up and we're going to meet your father. So, feeling weak in her knees, Maggie sat down on the edge of the bed in the room. The results of the genetic test. They confirmed? That I'm his daughter? Yes, said Vivian. Good, Maggie nodded. I'll be right back. Just for a minute. And she went into the bathroom. Vivian could hear what was going on in there. Maggie was crying, but she didn't disturb her, realizing that it was natural and in a way even normal. After all, Maggie had just received confirmation that her beloved mommy and loving father, it turned out, were not her own in the very same sense. She, of course, it was clear she wouldn't have changed her attitude towards them for the worse. Still, it was quite a shock. Half an hour or so passed and Maggie came out. Washed, not shivering. You could feel the man pulling himself together. I'm ready, she said. They were silent on the road, and everyone, it was clear, was thinking about their own things. Maggie barely noticed that the house she had driven into was a whole suburban mansion surrounded by a gorgeous garden. Taylor was in the driver's seat and gallantly opened the doors in front of the women. Vivian only snickered at that. Maggie absent-mindedly accepted the offered hand, climbed the stairs, entered the marble lobby, which in terms of floor space would be a modest one-bedroom. Maggie froze, because here they were met by a man. He looked even older than his mature years, but in him, though he stood motionless, there was a hidden strength and a need to live impetuously. He gave the impression of a master of life, but right now, he was confused. I am, he said. I guess I should have come myself. Or how? I don't know. He nervously ran his hand over his gray and balding head. I feel like, this is a dream. But you're real, aren't you? He stammered, as if the next word was stuck in his throat. Yes, Maggie answered. It's not a dream. And neither am I. I confess I don't know what to do, what to say, how to act right now. He nodded and sighed. Maggie smiled with the corners of her lips. But I do. Vivian broke the languidly nervous atmosphere as if a glass cup had been shattered with a clinking sound. It's customary for guests to be invited to sit down, to have tea. That's right, Ben grinned, coming to his senses. Of course, let's go into the parlor. In 5 minutes, the maid brought a tray of tea, but the table with all sorts of snacks, from canapes to miniature cakes, was already set. And the conversation flowed. Maggie thought she was dreaming after all. Because, how could that be possible? In fact, when she realized that she could not slip out of this story and back into the usual course of her life, she was expecting some obstacles. And later Vivian told her that she was expecting bad things too. Like the fact that they would be told that Lexi had lost her mind and been put in a madhouse. Or that Taylor and Ben would refuse to believe the story and say it was a blatant lie to get the money and just kick them out the door. And I just couldn't believe it could be that simple in life. Simple? Ben asked and looked sadly, thoughtfully, when Maggie, in one of the next conversations, one of the next days, revealed her thoughts like that. Isn't it just? On the contrary, it's too complicated, but. And why should it be even more complicated now? Why? Well, Maggie shrugged her shoulders. It's just that it's kind of hard for me to get used to having a father. Again. Oh, I didn't mean to say. You didn't say anything like that, Ben smiled. And know that I don't want to try to replace the father you had, move him. No, I realize that you grew up with other people. You'll never be little, but I still want you to be my daughter, do you understand? Yes, Maggie nodded. And you. Don't be mad. Lexi, it's because of her. I'm not going to lie, Ben glared at her. Angry was a mild word for it. But I didn't touch her, of course. A woman, and an old woman at that. And besides, it's been so long. I think she's already doubting the decision she made back then. Oh, I'm afraid it hit Lexi hard. It's a lot to carry around for years. A couple days later, by the way, Maggie moved into Ben's house. He said he couldn't let his daughter live in a hotel when she had her own house. Vivian, by the way, was invited too because Maggie said she was her best friend. You're it, she admonished Maggie. Don't be shy. If life gives it to you, if your father turned out to be like that, then take the best. You have the right, after all. The point was that Ben had once suggested that Maggie go shopping. Not that he criticized the way his daughter was dressed, but he said he wanted to make up for all the years he'd missed out on presents. So he gave Maggie one of his cards, with which she could buy whatever she wanted. "I don't really need anything," Maggie said. And Maggie was also very touched that her father had never once said anything about her spot on her face, as if she were perfectly all right. And she had been afraid of that he wouldn't want an ugly daughter. And naturally, these days it was necessary to talk business too. Ben said that now Maggie just had to move to town, and Vivian was on his side. What if I don't want to? It was the first time Maggie had ever been so openly indignant. Maybe I like living in my mother's old house. It's cozy. Maybe I like working in the library. Maybe I want to stay in the village. I wouldn't force you, or even persuade you very much, Ben smiled, taking her hand gently. All I'm saying is that now, your life could change a lot, and I ask you to think carefully about these new possibilities. Another bad assumption did not come true. Taylor, as it turned out, was not at all furious that he was not the only one who would get the firm. However, Maggie was particularly adamant on this point and said at once no, she had no education, so there was no question of transferring the company to her. Ben replied that he hadn't even considered that option, because she really had no education or experience. Because Taylor has been with him for more than 1 year, and he intends to secure a brilliant future for him. But Ben has announced his decision. He intends to gradually bring his daughter up to speed, and also, naturally, it will get a controlling stake in due course. And Taylor, who will own a solid chunk of it too, will always be there to help. "I don't want to think about losing you, Daddy," Maggie exclaimed at one point. "I mean, we've just found each other." That's how she called him father for the first time, and it happened when they were alone together. Ben nodded and smiled, tears welling up in his eyes. "I don't want to think about it either, daughter. You're right, let's not talk about it. I'm not quite an old man yet." And Maggie refused to leave the village so abruptly. She said she needed time to think about everything, to think about what to do with Mama's house, to quit her job in peace. Ben reluctantly agreed, and Maggie and Vivian came back. Maggie was slowly going through her things, deciding what to take with her from the house. There was no need to sell it, and she decided she would just leave it closed. She wrote a letter of resignation of her own volition. And with no one, Maggie shared the story that had befallen her. So she was quite shocked when Nick approached her one day. It was late evening. The girl was returning from the meadow. She went to look at the sunset over the river. "Hello," Nick said and walked beside her, staggering. He was obviously not sober. "So you went to town," he added. Maggie shrugged. "They say you've got a real father. A rich one." "Says who?" Maggie stopped abruptly. She'd told Vivian not to say a word to anyone. "Well," Nick stretched out and said, "I've heard that story from the women. I understand," he added with a nasty grin. "Your mother couldn't help herself then, in her time. She was weak, it turned out then. She decided to have an affair with a rich man. Well, it's clear, such women." "Don't you dare." Maggie was choking with indignation. "You don't know what you're saying. Shut up." "Come on," Nick said. "What are you getting so upset about? There's no offense to the truth. And you, why aren't you in town with your dad?" Let me guess, he suddenly moved closer to her. "Money can't buy everything, can it? You can't compete with those city girls, can you? You've been teased by the rich for what you look like, haven't you?" "Well, don't be sad." Nick's hands insidiously dug into her thighs. "You're ugly in the face, of course. But if you look at your face in the dark, you don't have to look at it. It's the other thing about a woman that counts." A scream was already rising in Maggie's throat, but then an unknown force tore Nick away from her, tore and threw him aside so that he fell right into the nettles. He screamed, of course, floundered, there was swearing. "Are you all right?" Taylor's voice came out. He was standing nearby, looming over Maggie like a protective rock, a guarding beast. "I'm here," Taylor said. "I thought I'd come see you. Vivian said you liked to go to the river, so I didn't interrupt the atmosphere." He nodded at a distant car that Maggie hadn't noticed at first. "I thought I'd come up to you, just stand next to you." And then Taylor almost growled at the end. "I saw him like that." And he clenched his fists and stepped toward Nick, with the clear intention of continuing the educational process. Maggie, aghast, rushed over and stood between us. "No, don't. I don't want you to do this." Okay, Taylor exhaled and sent Nick a hard look. "Get out, and don't you dare go near her. Do you understand?" Nick, wailing about how it didn't hurt, and how someone in this city was crazy, hurried away. And Maggie, when the first shock had worn off, laughed unexpectedly for herself. And then Taylor took her hand and said that, since he'd somehow gotten to the very end of the sunset, maybe they should watch the stars go up. Maggie agreed she loved to look at the starry sky. "I've been thinking about you a lot," Taylor said. The girl withdrew her hand. Oh, what a strange tone he had. And then she froze like a frightened deer because Taylor had said he really liked her. "Impossible," Maggie breathed out. "No, it can't be." "Why?" he asked. "I realize that we don't know each other very well." "No, that's not what I mean." "Then what is it?" You see," Maggie replied with tears in her voice. I'm ugly." Taylor was silent for a moment. Then, he suddenly turned her toward him and put his palms down on her shoulders gently. "It's dark now and I can barely see your face, but I know it's beautiful. And when the sun comes up tomorrow, I can say it again without lying. I really think you're an amazing girl, and I really like you, I'm not kidding. It's different if you say no just because. Well, maybe you're not ready for a relationship, or maybe I'm not your type of man. Or you don't want to confuse personal and professional relationships after all. Ben said I'm supposed to help you get into the business and help you choose the best training so you'll be ready to take the business one day. In that case, I'll accept your choice, and the most I dare ask is to be your friend. But if you refuse me because of this, because of what's wrong with you, then I can't accept it. And I want to ask you out." Maggie had never before, since the stain had taken over her face, thought that love would be possible for her in this world. And even though Taylor had not yet said that very cherished word love, she could understand, she knew in her heart what he felt for her. But the trouble was that it was unexpectedly hard to accept it. But thanks to what he had told her, she was ready to do it. Maggie began, ready to answer with a timid assent. And she wanted to add that he might not think her a frivolous person for agreeing so quickly. But at that moment, a shriek pierced the silence over the river and meadow, and then a loud splash, and then the sound of frightened children's voices. Maggie rushed to the sound, and as she rounded the dense thicket of young trees, she finally realized what had happened. It turned out that it was 3 children of Ty they thought to go night fishing, settled on the highest place of the shore. But one, the smallest, fell off. "Damn it," exclaimed Taylor, who came after Maggie. "I can't swim." "I can swim." Maggie just kicked off her shoes and then jumped into the water. It was not so high to fly down, but the shore was not flat, but steep, going sharply into the depths. Muddy water muffled her. But Maggie didn't give up. A few strong strokes, she looked into the murky expanse of the river around. Got it. Tightly grasping the child's figure, she reached up to the air, to life. It took some more work to get to the part of the bank where they could get out. Taylor grabbed Maggie and the boy. Another of Taya's sons fussed nearby, and the daughter ran after her mother. Taya was shocked when the little girl came running and blurted out that Greg had drowned. However, while the mother, who was almost mad with horror, ran with her husband to the river, her daughter added that Maggie had jumped after Greg and would probably save him. And then Taya saw it all with her own eyes. "Thank you." "Oh, thank you, honey. You saved my favorite son." Taya oohed and ahed, clutching Greg, who was roaring with fright and sniffling. Maggie stood nearby, wrapped in the jacket Taylor had thrown over her shoulders. She was silent. What was there to say? And Taya? Oh, in those moments, looking at Greg's savior, she suddenly realized with heart-stopping clarity how cruel and unfair she had been. And she felt so ashamed. So sick. "I'm sorry," Taya whispered. "Maggie, I swear on my children, never again. I'm sorry." "Oh, you're so kind. I've done you so much harm. I've poisoned you as much as the others." "Oh, Maggie, I'm sorry. Ty's husband coughed awkwardly and joined his wife in apologizing. Maggie listened to the man. She was so tired. Frozen. Tired, really. Maggie left the village the next morning with Taylor. But before she did, she had a word with Vivian. And how unpleasantly surprised she was when Vivian confessed that, yes, she had shared a little of the news with a couple of acquaintances. "I'm sorry," she said, "but I'm not used to being a recluse like you." She asked me what we were doing when we went to town. Well, I told her a little. And what? I didn't really do anything wrong, did I? Maggie seemed to agree with her in part. And yet, she was very unhappy that the one she had considered her best friend for years had so openly shared the details of her private life with strangers. And time flew. Life in the city turned out to be unexpectedly interesting. But at first, Maggie stayed at home. Ben and Taylor persuaded her to go out to the theater, park, restaurant, shopping. And little by little, though not immediately, but Maggie began to thaw. And it turned out that yes, there are of course people who look at her appearance. There are also those who can comment behind her back. But in principle, it is quite realistic to get away from it. And what was also pleasant, but in Ben's company, where he brought his daughter several times to get acquainted with everything to begin with, no one has not shown that her appearance is unpleasant. And Maggie understood here people, apparently, are afraid to offend the boss. But she was partly indifferent on their own, or forced, the main thing that did not offend. About 3 months later, it became known that Lexi had recovered. The stay in a good private clinic had done her good. She became more sociable, less withdrawn, and she wanted to go home to the relatives she had been staying with all these years. Ben had arranged it for her. But before Lexi stopped by Edie's house, they had a lot to talk about. Maggie, by the way, remembering how kind the old man had always been to her, one day when it was already fall, had approached Ben with a request: could she help Edie a little? His house had a leaky roof, and also the refrigerator was quite old. Ben did everything, and even more, he arranged for Edie to repair the building where he kept the animals, and also brought new appliances for the kitchen. Maggie did not forget about Vivian, with whom she finally made peace. She gave her best friend a bead of black pearls, which she had dreamed of since her youth, as well as a trip to an expensive sanatorium to treat her back. And then, one day, Maggie suddenly realized that she somehow began to not that forget, but let go of all the bad things that she happened to endure in the village from evil people. The girl gradually changed. At some point, she awoke a purely feminine curiosity about clothes, and she carefully, still a little shy, began to buy herself dresses, shoes, and everything else that could be imagined in the closet. Soon she chose a university to get an education on her father's advice. Maggie talked a lot with Taylor. They became closer and closer. And one day he proposed to her. And now Maggie, already without any doubts, was able to accept the fact that in life, just like in a good movie or novel, everything can be just fine, without obstacles and difficulties. She replied in agreement. "Only I have to do something before the wedding," she told Taylor. And he accepted her choice. The thing was that Maggie decided to try to get rid of the stain after all. Ben had chosen a clinic with the best specialists and reputation for her. Taylor accepted the choice of his beloved, but on the day on which the most complicated procedure was scheduled, worried. He waited for Maggie in the hall, comfortable, cozy, where in principle could wait for patients, their relatives and friends. Suddenly the doors opened, and Maggie entered with a quick step and threw herself on Taylor's neck. "What happened?" he asked. But the doctor said, "Did everything go through?" "No," Maggie said with a smile. "They canceled it." "But why?" And then she explained, because she didn't need it anymore. Maggie suddenly realized that her spot on her face wasn't ugly at all, as others had convinced her. Yes, she wished it wasn't there at all. But it was impossible. And she didn't want to put herself at risk just to make it a little less noticeable. Maggie was finally able to just accept herself and move on with it, live with it. And Ben and Taylor, the two people closest to her, had been completely supportive of her in that. Kristen ran home, opened the door, and found herself in the dark silence of the hallway. She realized with secret relief that it seemed like no one was home, which meant she would have time to cook dinner. As usual, throwing her bag on the nightstand, She kicked off her shoes and moved towards the kitchen. But before reaching it, she suddenly stopped, waved her hand, and abruptly changing direction, entered the room. She sat down on the sofa, leaned back, and closed her eyes with pleasure. How good it is to just sit down and do nothing for at least a while. Kristen suddenly clearly realized how tired she was. This was not the kind of fatigue that any person experiences after a hard day of work, some task requiring physical exertion, or, for example, after a sleepless night. Kristen's fatigue was somehow endless, hopeless, overwhelming. And if she could get rid of the first one by simply resting and speaking out, then it was still unclear what she should do with her feelings. Her whole life in the last few years had been like an endless race in a circle. Housework, work, Andrew, child. In general, everything was familiar, ordinary, like everyone else. Millions of women live in exactly the same way, but no one considers this something special, does not lament the injustice in women's lot, or complains about fate. Take, for example, her best, in fact, if you look at it, her only friend since school. Her position is the head of the legal department of a huge commercial company, with a bunch of people subordinate to her. Of course, the salary is more than decent, but the responsibility is scary to think about. And not only for yourself, but also for others. By the way, there are 3 children and a husband. Or, as Helen jokingly calls him, my eldest child, hinting at some immaturity of her dear person. At home, Helen fundamentally does everything herself, although it is unclear when and how she gets everything done, given the size of their apartment, the presence in it of 3 teenagers, a large dog, and a scientist husband, a man, to put it mildly, not practical. How, despite all this, she managed to maintain her blooming appearance and cheerful disposition from year to year was a huge mystery to everyone. For everyone except Lena, who, flashing a smile, told Kristen, I've been telling you the same thing for many years, you need to love and respect yourself. Understand, Kristen brushed aside her friend's words, considering it a hackneyed and meaningless phrase. She believed that she certainly respected herself. Just how can this feeling help her to do everything, and most importantly, to feel as easy and calm, to be as humanly happy as the same Helen? She didn't understand. Well, from tomorrow a completely different life begins. And she herself, Kristen, a 33-year-old woman who just a few years ago, no one had ever given her age, and now looking 50 years old, will never be the same. She will be fine. Kristen was raised by her mother. The girl did not remember her father. As her mother, whose name was Anne, later told her, he fell ill and died suddenly when Kristen was not yet 2 years old. Life turned out so that they had no one else in the world except each other. Mom, having buried her husband, did not even try to arrange her personal life anymore and devoted herself entirely to her daughter. Her whole life and every moment of it were devoted to the child. The girl's health from birth was poor. She was frankly behind her peers in height and energy. She was often sick, and Anne spent her first few years in constant fear that something terrible and irreparable was about to happen to her daughter. Mother, you cannot do it this way. An elderly pediatrician who had been observing Kristen since birth ironically reprimanded her. You will go crazy before your Kristen goes to school. For example, now a girl has a common cold, and you are panicking, as if we have identified a terrible infection in your child. Having matured a little, Kristen became stronger and almost caught up with the children of her age. And yet she still remained fragile, touching, and defenseless. She spoke little, and almost always kept her head slightly lowered. And her favorite pastime from early childhood was drawing. Anna had no education other than school. She worked as a cloakroom attendant in the city theater, and of course their family did not have much money left. While Kristen was little, this did not affect her life in any way. On the contrary, she considered her mother's work to be the best, because the girl could watch all the performances for free. And the New Year holidays with successive children's performances, which she watched one after another, not paying attention to the repeating plots of the same characters, generally turned into a continuous holiday for her. What is unimportant and invisible to a baby looks completely different to a teenager. Growing up, Kristen, of course, could not help but notice that she was the worst in the class. She was poorly dressed. She had the oldest briefcase, a gift from one of the neighbors. And in physical education class, she wore the funniest sneakers, the kind you can only see in old photographs, and not sneakers like everyone else. She watched in amazement as her classmates defiantly threw money out of their pockets in front of each other, showed off their belongings, and discussed family trips to seaside resorts and the upcoming holidays. Despite this, it never occurred to Kristen to blame her mother for anything. She saw that she was doing everything she could for her daughter. She just could do very little. Her health failed her at times. Small, thin, she, giving her growing daughter an extra, sweeter piece, lived practically from hand to mouth, and from year to year wore the same drafty coat and boots, the soles of which had long lead in everything they stepped on. And what only the soul holds on to. So skinny. The neighbors shook their heads, watching Anne as she always hurried somewhere. But what Kristen understood and patiently endured, her peers could not understand and tolerate. With the harshness and cruelty characteristic of many teenagers, they hurled vile words in her direction, at first in a whisper, not really understanding the inadmissibility of this. But with age they did it more and more consciously. At the beginning of the next school year, the class in which Kristen studied was supposed to go on an excursion to a neighboring city. The guys were, of course, excited about the upcoming trip and heatedly discussed it and made plans. One of the points of the program was a visit to the opera and ballet theater famous throughout the country. Kristen, who has loved theatrical performances since childhood, was looking forward to this particular event with special interest and already knew the theater's repertoire and the schedule of performances by heart. We should go to this theater, discussed the guys, who for the most part were not delighted with the attempts to introduce them to high art. It would be better if we went to the zoo. What is there to even see? Who knows what we will watch? Carmen Kristen suddenly announced with unusual excitement. Her voice sounded unexpectedly loud, and everyone turned in her direction. Are you planning to go too? Suddenly Kristen asked the most beautiful, by everyone's own opinion, girl in the class, Sarah. Kristen looked around hauntedly and felt her ears begin to burn. Ugh. You will disgrace us in front of everyone, said Sarah. I can imagine what you will wear to the theater. Probably in that terrible sundress, knitted, with flowers, which you wore on March 8th. By the way, if you think this is festive clothing, then I want to disappoint you. This is clothing for a stuffed animal. Why did you go and take off that sundress from him? Kristen felt tears boiling in her eyes. She lowered her head low, and a warm drop fell on her hand. You better shut up, princess. Suddenly a ringing voice was heard in the class, which easily drowned out the disgusting sycophantic giggles of the children. Otherwise, you yourself won't be able to go anywhere, because I will spank you. You will sit at home and change lotions on your black eye. Understood? Kristen wiped her eyes and raised her head in front of Lara. With her fists on her sides, stood a girl named Helen. Everyone knew better than to mess with her. Not only has she been seriously involved in some type of martial arts for a long time and can easily beat not only Sarah, but also any of the boys, but she also has a brother, Victor, who studies in high school. And everyone again knows that Victor is the guy is athletic, serious and authoritative. What are you doing? Sarah asked in amazement. Are you standing up for this scarecrow? You yourself, scarecrow, she retorted. And in general, if anyone comes to her again or says something nasty, they will have to deal with me, okay? Thank you, Kristen said quietly, getting closer to her unexpected intercessor at the next break. What? Helen asked. What are you muttering there? I don't understand. And anyway, why do you always talk as if you're going to die? I'm saying. Kristen took a deep breath and spoke louder. Thank you for helping me. Oh, nonsense, Helen waved it off. Sarah should have been put in her place a long time ago. My mistress too. She became completely insolent. Yes, and it's your own fault. Why are you silent? You always endure like some kind of sheep. Do you like being insulted? And anyway, why are you some kind of orphan? And I am an orphan. Kristen laughed quietly. Well, that is half. I only have my mother. Oh, excuse me, please, Kristen. Helen was confused. I haven't paid attention to such little things for a long time. Well, anyway, thank you again for standing up for me. Kristen nodded and turned to leave and sit at the last desk, where she almost always sat alone. Hey, you wait. Helen moved decisively after her. Come on, you will sit with me now. Like this? Kristen was confused. But Oleg is sitting with you. Just think, Oleg is sitting. It's okay. It means he'll change seats. Oleg, Helen barked at the whole class, turning to one of her classmates. Quickly pull yourself together and go to the last desk. Her eyesight is poor. She needs to sit closer to the board. From that day on, Kristen's life, at least at school, changed dramatically. She no longer felt like an outcast and people began to greet her. At first, stuttering forced with an eye on the omnipresent Helen, and then simply and habitually, because this is normal. Kristen has become a much better student. It turned out that she has an excellent memory. But the most important thing is that everyone learned about her talent. To the first secret, and then obvious admiration of her class, it turned out that she draws incredibly well. Kristen has even changed in appearance for the better. She stopped clenching herself as she had done before, as if trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. And then, to everyone's amazement, it turned out that Kristen was actually very good at something. Anna inherited from her mother fragility, grace, good, thick, slightly curly hair, dark brown, slightly red, long eyelashes, and beautiful, even white teeth, which everyone finally saw after their owner began to smile. All this became very noticeable in high school. Ellen never gave up on anything halfway, and having taken a kind of patronage over Kristen, she did not limit herself to forcing the class to accept Kristen and begin to treat her normally. A few days after the memorable conversation, she dragged her new friend to her home. Then she introduced her classmate to her parent. "Mom, let's give her my jeans." "Well, those that didn't bother me after the summer." "Well, maybe there's more." Her mother, looking at her compassionate child with a smile, turned her eyes to thin Kristen. She knew the girl, of course. "I heard about her difficult fate and the cheerful life of her small family." "Yes, please, I don't mind," she nodded. "But if Kristen herself doesn't mind, of course, bring the jeans. And remember, if you don't stop eating so much bread, you'll soon be able to give Kristen all your clothes." "Come on," Kristen Helen mumbled, thrusting almost new pants into Kristen's hands. "They're just lying there anyway. And what do you give me for this?" "Well, I don't know, I came up with an idea. You will draw my portrait." By her senior year, things were looking up for Kristen. Helen's efforts and care showed, and Kristen herself became a completely different person. Soon, the highlight of the school exhibition were ironic drawings and cartoons by Kristen, in which the children recognized themselves and each other with delight and amazement. After this, Kristen became, if not a star, then at least a person whose unconditional abilities were recognized by everyone at school. In addition, she is the class beauty of the class. Kristen's longtime follower, Sarah, suddenly became covered with teenage acne, and Kristen, on the contrary, blossomed with some special, subtle, translucent girlish beauty that not everyone notices, but which cannot be forgotten once you see it. After graduating from school, Kristen entered art school. The girl had no prior preparation. However, during the creative exam, Kristen, fulfilling the examiner's assignment, really shined and was accepted. "You are very gifted," one of the admissions committee members told her. "You have an amazing innate sense of composition and color. But you have poor technical skills and are not at all prepared in terms of theory. You need to work a lot and read in your specialty, dear girl. Well, for example, let's take this portrait from your portfolio. It is, of course, very interesting in the manner of execution, but at the same time it contains a lot of mistakes." Well, look, the teacher launched into long, lengthy analyses of her work. By the way, a portrait of Lena. And Kristen listened to her work with delight. "How can he even judge my portrait if he has never seen me? The portrait is awesome. Everyone says this, see, it looks like me. Well, just like a photograph, only 100 times better. I've never looked good in photos, but here it's so great." Helen, he wasn't talking about the similarity, but about technical errors. But, you know, the composition itself, proportions, light and shade, plasticity. "Oh, okay, don't bother me with all this. I still won't understand anything. You draw just great." Kristen enjoyed studying at school and drew every free minute of her life. Helen, with her characteristic practicality, declared that not everyone can be great creators. Someone needs to earn money, and she entered the university to study law. The girls, of course, saw each other much less frequently than when they were at school, but they still constantly maintained friendly relations. Kristen felt more than just gratitude towards Helen for the fact that her friend had once, in fact, completely changed her life. She saw Helen as an older sister, and the latter, on the contrary, having taken part in the fate of a school outcast several years ago, was sincerely proud of her friend and perceived her as the younger sister she never had. Things were going very well for Kristen at school. She was really talented. Her work was noted as one of the best. And after a couple of years, they started talking about her as a young artist with her own style. "You see, girl," the elderly teacher who was their course leader explained to her with inspiration, "an artist is not someone who can draw a cat or a tree exactly as it looks in reality or in a photograph. This is not an artist. This is a copying machine. And an artist is someone who lives in his own world and knows how to show this world to others with light, form, and strokes. Here you have it, this sketch, for example. God knows how you managed to make me see an old man here. Kristen laughed along with the teacher and meticulously looked at the sheet from which, framed by gray hair swaying in the wind, the prickly, stern gaze of a wise elderly man peered into her. Time fled, and my studies at the school quickly ended. She received a diploma as an artist teacher, and with it a complete lack of understanding of what to do next. At the graduation ceremony, the rector told her, "Well, you are perhaps one of our most talented students in recent times. But unfortunately, in modern times, this is not enough. You need opportunities, time, a workshop, tools, materials. Yes, in general, to become an artist, you need money, no matter how bad it may sound. And to become a great artist, you need a lot of money." The man paused and sighed heavily. "Still, I wish you success. Maybe not now, later, someday, but your gift certainly deserves it." Hearing this was both pleasant and scary at the same time. But Kristen didn't want to think about her fate yet. She was young, beautiful, happy, and all the thoughts of her and her former classmates were occupied with their graduation evening. They decided to celebrate their graduation at the highest level, in a fashionable nightclub. Mom gave her daughter silver earrings. They were made in the form of the thinnest leaves, which intertwined with each other and ended in an elegant flower with a small diamond in the center. Mom, what a miracle. Kristen took a long time to come to her senses and didn't even realize right away. "How are you? Where did you get the money?" Anne finished asking her daughter. "Well, honey, your mother is not such a loser that she couldn't save up for a gift for her only girl." Kristen's nose stung and her eyes itched. And then Kristen put on her dress, prepared for going out to the club, and now it was Anne's turn to sigh in admiration and wipe her eyes. Only she did it without hiding, and without hiding her happy tears. The dress was extraordinary, very simple, straight, with almost no details. It was made of elastic, but at the same time dense fabric. The dress fit her figure like a glove, creating a silhouette of incredible beauty and femininity. The rather deep cutout on the back was absolutely breathtaking. The color of the fabric was in great harmony with the loose, light chestnut curls, and the light, barely noticeable makeup only emphasized the calm, somehow unusual, as if a little not modern, and this made it even more attractive, beauty of the girl. When Kristen appeared among her classmates, everyone simply gasped. She read undisguised admiration in the guy's eyes. But many girls looked at her with poorly concealed envy. All these sensations were completely unusual for Kristen, and made her head spin no less than the light wine that the waiter periodically poured into her. The party was in full swing. The music and conversations became louder, faces became hotter, and the behavior of those around them became freer. Many of the guys went dancing, and Kristen, who had never been to this kind of place before, watched with curiosity what was happening on the dance floor. "Can I bother you?" She heard a man's voice above her. Kristen raised her head. A young man stood in front of her. With the tenacious gaze of an artist, she instantly took in all the details, noted the harmonious facial features, figure, neatly styled blonde hair, and most importantly, incredibly beautiful hands with long fingers and surprisingly graceful wrists for a man. She immediately drew attention to his hands, because the man was holding in them an amazingly beautiful, blooming rose on a long stem. How beautiful, the girl burst out completely involuntarily. "It is for you." He handed her a flower, a beautiful rose for the most beautiful girl in the club. "Well, why are you embarrassed, Kristen?" "No need. After all, it turns out that I begged her from you. How can I put it?" "It turns out," he laughed cheerfully. "Although no, of course I brought it just for you as a bribe." "Bribery?" she asked again, incomprehensibly. "Yes, bribery." The guy smiled. His smile was extremely charming. I immediately wanted to smile back. "I just thought that if I tried to give you a flower and you accepted it, it would be awkward for you to refuse me the dance. I'll take the rose from you, but I still won't go dancing." "But why?" He looked really and truly upset. "You don't like me at all." "Not at all, not a bit. And you can't even stand me for one dance?" "No, why? You are very pretty. I just don't know how to dance at all." "Well, not a bit. Moreover." The conversation that took place between them under the roar of club music was, of course, a simple and light track, without any pretensions to content. It was a non-binding conversation between a guy and a girl. They were a little inspired by the atmosphere, music, drinking, youth, and freedom. Kristen, for the first time feeling so liberated about her attractiveness and femininity, the power of all this over men, did not recognize herself at all. It seemed that there were no barriers, no conventions, no obligations, nothing that would prevent her from cheerfully chatting about anything with this terribly handsome guy, saying words that a few hours ago she would have been embarrassed to even think. "I can't do that either," the guy waved his hand. "You know, there's another establishment not far from here. It's very decent. It has a completely different atmosphere and wonderful live music. Perhaps you would agree to continue the evening there? I invite you, please do not refuse. You know, today is my birthday. It so happened that I was left alone. If you would agree to sit with me for a while, it would be the best gift for me. Please." He folded his hands in some kind of prayerful gesture, and Kristen once again involuntarily noted their grace. She looked around uncertainly. Many of the former students were already pretty tipsy. Until recently, the funny crowd had broken up into couples and groups, and one could be sure that hardly anyone would notice its disappearance. She looked again at her new acquaintance. He was so attractive, dressed in a white shirt, black trousers, and a formal jacket. He stood out among the drunken denim crowd, like a noble hare among mules. But most importantly, he looked at her with such admiration, and this look excited her so much that her legs lifted Kristen from the table. "Well, even though I don't understand what's going on and why I'm behaving this way, I agree," she said. "Thank you." The guy's eyes darkened. He gallantly pulled his hand away and offered it to Kristen. "Oh, wait." She suddenly stopped and laughed. "What is this, really? I'm almost ready to go with you to God knows where, and I don't even know your name." "Sorry, it's my fault. I lost my head." He smiled sweetly and spread his arms, bowing playfully. "Let me introduce myself, Andrew." "Kristen." She curtsied. "Well, everyone, it seems like all the formalities have been completed. Let's go." He suddenly took her hand and quickly, as if fearing that they would be stopped, walked towards the exit. They were sitting in a small, cozy restaurant, which, after the roar and hustle and bustle of the club, felt unusually good. A wonderful tea rose stood in a vase with water. Kristen looked over the flower at Andrew, and she wanted this night to never end. "You promised me a dance," he suddenly said and extended his hand. "And you promised to teach me how to dance," she answered. His hand lay softly and tenderly on her waist. She put her hands on his shoulders and felt happy. Apparently, he sensed the moment and gently pulled her towards him. She took a deep breath. "You know, I have to go." Kristen literally forced herself to say these words. "Why did I somehow offend you?" He tried to look into the girl's eyes. No, what are you talking about? Everything was amazing. It was a wonderful evening, maybe the best of my life. But it's already very late. But I will see you again. He persistently tried to catch her eye. "I don't know, I'm not sure if this is necessary. Maybe it's not worth it. Just let everything remain as it is. Andrew, you are a wonderful guy. I had a very good time with you today. Happy birthday." Kristen stood on her tiptoes and kissed him on the cheek. She approached the exit but could not stand it and turned around. Andrew sat at the table, looking after her in confusion. She laughed joyfully, returned, and stroked his hair. "Write down my phone number." It was incredibly easy for her. Everything seemed simple and natural. For the first time in her life, she simply did what she wanted, without thinking about how right or decent it was. They started meeting every day. They walked around the city, sat on benches in the park, rowed a boat on the old pond, ate cakes in small summer cafes. "We're going to a restaurant this evening," he suddenly declared. "You should wear that amazing dress you wore to your prom." "Why is that?" Kristen was surprised. "Because today is our anniversary. It's been exactly a week since we met," Andrew solemnly announced. At first she laughed, but then realized that he was completely serious. And again there was a beautiful rose in a crystal glass, light wine and a gentle melody, Andrew's hands on her back and shoulders. "I was wrong when I told you that you were the most beautiful girl in the club," he whispered. That is, she was amazed, despite the bliss that overwhelmed her. "Are you trying to say that I'm not that good?" "I just want to say that you are the most beautiful girl in the world." What woman doesn't want to hear such words? Who among them can stand against them? They spent the night together. In a small but cozy apartment, Andrew. She woke up first and lay there for a long time, not believing what happened to her, trying to realize herself a completely new, different, alien, unfamiliar woman. Andrew was sleeping soundly, and Kristen was looking at him, afraid to move and frighten away the feeling of peace and happiness that covered her in a warm wave. He was lying on the edge of the bed, turned on his side. A dark lock of hair covered his face and hung over the edge of the sofa. He put his other hand under his cheek, and his long fingers tangled in his hair. Kristen quietly made her way to get the album and pencil that were always in her bag. Taking them and trying not to make noise, she sat down in a chair. The drawing appeared on the paper easily and quickly, but still she was not finished yet. Andrew stirred and opened his eyes. "What are you doing?" he said, seeing her concentrated face. "I'm drawing the most beautiful fingers I've ever seen." Kristen smiled. "Fingers?" Andrew asked in amazement and jumped up from the sofa and approached the girl. "What other fingers? Come on, show me. Why fingers? Is this the only thing attractive about me?" "You have very beautiful hands." "No, really. I noticed it immediately as soon as I saw you for the first time there, in the club." "Come on, stop it, you'll say the same." "I have stupid hands, small like a girl's. Mom says that such hands are a shame for a man. Although everything about you really seems beautiful. Damn, this is just great. You are a real artist. Let me kiss you urgently for this. Come on, look at me." Helen, whom Kristen had not seen for several weeks, and looked at her friend with surprise. "Listen, what's wrong with you? You're just glowing." "Kristen, admit it, what's going on? Fell in love or what?" Helen said the last phrase just like that, without thinking, and froze when she saw Kristen nodding vigorously, her eyes shining in her smile. "Wow," Helen said slowly. "Are you with a man? I thought this would never happen. So what, he's one of your crazy ones? Shaggy artist. Will you eat 1 briquette of instant noodles a day for 2 and draw imperishable masterpieces?" "No," Kristen laughed. "He's not one of us. He's completely different. Wonderful, gentle, smart. In general, it's clear. The best. A friend finished for her. And when will I be introduced to this miracle of miracles? I just really want to look at the prince. You know, in recent years I have been seeing horses more and more." By this time, Helen had been married to her classmate for 3 years and was raising little sons, twins. She and her husband truly loved each other. The sons, of course, were adored. The phrase about horses was most likely intended to emphasize the heroic build of her men. Soon Helen and Andrew met. He was polite, reserved, and seemed a little afraid. She carefully probed him with her gaze and her trademark irony. "Well, what can I tell you?" Helen hugged her friend by the shoulders and looked into her eyes. "You love him. It's obvious, and you're happy. Here he is. You know, it seemed to me." "Oh, okay, everything will be fine. I am so happy for you." Summer was ending. The best summer in Kristen's life was spent with her loved one. Kristen went to work at an art school and began teaching drawing to children of all ages. The business was, of course, not entirely profitable, but it brought Kristen a lot of pleasure. Every day, ideas for future paintings of my own raced through my head, and my folders were swelling with sketches. Mom looked in surprise at her daughter, who was either singing songs desperately and out of tune, or spinning around the room like a little girl, and sometimes she was just sitting on a small loggia, raising her face to the soft autumn sun, smiling happily. One September evening, Andrew came in looking somewhat excited. It took Kristen a long time to gain control of his spirit, his words, and finally spoke. "Kristen, in general, I told my family about you. You probably remember, I told you I was not born here, I'm from." He said the name of a large village 50 kilometers from the city. "I have a large family, father, mother, grandfather, 2 uncles, 3 aunts. And this, mind you, I'm not talking about their wives and husbands." Despite the tension, Andrew suddenly laughed, obviously imagining his numerous relatives. "I also have 2 sisters and a younger brother. I have never counted my cousins, but there are even more of them. In general, I'm from a camp," he joked, having finished listing family members. Kristen listened with amazement about the family. She had no one in the world except her mother, and she simply could not imagine what it was like to have so many relatives. "Listen, you are a happy person," she said, "to have so many relatives who love you. Well, they want to get to know you, you know. And I promised that we would come next Saturday. But I have to warn you, my mother. Well, how can I explain it to you? She is so very domineering. She loves everything to be the way she wants. Well, she was very surprised when I told about the fact that we are together, that you and I have a relationship. And she, of course, has a lot of questions at once, both about you and in general, Understand. It seems Kristen smiled cheerfully, although inside, to be honest, everything was shaking. And most likely, I am not at all the option that she wants for you. Well, what does this have to do with it? Andrew exclaimed. Whether Mom wants it or not, it doesn't matter. Well, or rather not really. Of course it doesn't. He was completely confused in his explanations, became confused, fell silent and looked pitifully at Kristen. Okay, I understand everything. Well, in fact, I understand perfectly well that I am not the most enviable option. Any mother in your place would not be very happy with such a girl for her son. If I were your mother, I wouldn't even let someone like me on the threshold. Kristen laughed, trying to make fun of Andrew's excitement and her own fear of meeting his family. Finally, the day appointed for the trip arrived. Kristen brought herself to an extreme state of anxiety with anticipation and did not sleep all night the night before she was tormented by the question how to dress. Do I need to wear makeup and do my hair? What will they think if she appears, so to speak, in a simple way? He'll say he doesn't respect us at all, so he needs to be on parade. What if they think she came to show off? When they ask about her family, maybe they can somehow remain silent and not talk too much about it. Lord, why did she agree to this trip? On the other hand, sooner or later she will have to meet his family if she wants to be with Andrew, and she really wants to. Her friend calmed her down, advising her to calm down. You can't show them any weakness, otherwise they'll quickly sit on your neck. I would like to go with you, Helen. Kristen finished dreamily, imagining what a meeting with Andrew's relatives could turn into with the participation of a friend in the role of her lawyer. She laughed merrily. As always, Lena's reasoning worked flawlessly. Kristen calmed down and met Andrew, who was following her, with a smile. Well, are you ready? He asked. No, she answered honestly. Kristen, just don't worry, okay? The main thing is that everything goes more or less smoothly with Mom. Everyone else will like you, I'm sure. Andrew muttered and was embarrassed, realizing that he was not saying at all what was needed. And he himself is worried, it seems, even more than Kristen. Kristen and Andrew arrived in the village and, excited, like first graders before their first lesson in their lives, holding hands, they entered the big house. They were really expected, because the spacious living room with huge windows was full of people. Some of them pretended to be doing something, but the majority were not lying. Frankly, and with curiosity, they looked at the chosen one. At first glance, it was clear who exactly was the center of public opinion here. A tall, plump woman of about 50, with a high, carefully styled hairstyle, stood up to meet them. Varnished hair, lips thickly painted with red lipstick, heavy earrings with large red stones, and an equally huge pendant around her neck. A dress made of shiny fabric with an overly bright pattern. All this, of course, was not modern and old-fashioned, but it was, nevertheless, very suitable for this woman. Kristen immediately realized at first sight that this was Andrew's mother, a woman on whom her fate seems to largely depend. Barbara Black was, in every sense of the word, a woman of considerable merit. For many years she worked as the chief accountant of the big vegetable plant, supplying several surrounding cities with fresh vegetables and herbs. The farm was really large and very troublesome, and in order to maintain order in it, one had to have a strong character and determination, great professional knowledge and basic endurance. Barbara possessed all these qualities to the fullest. She always knew about everything that happened at the plant. It doesn't matter what kind of area we were talking about, garages, farming, or the financial service directly subordinate to it. She decisively, and with equal firmness, dealt with negligent employees, unscrupulous suppliers, or late-paying customers. We need Barbara in the government, the workers laughed. Just as decisively and confidently as at work, Barbara handled household chores. How, with such a workload at work, she managed to keep the house and large household plot in perfect order, one could only guess. However, she had no shortage of help, given the large size of her family. Andrew was born third in their family after 2 girls. One of the sisters was already married and expecting a baby, and the second lived with her parents and cursed the garden, which needed care. The mother, as it seemed to her, loved her son more in her soul than the other children. For some reason, the long-awaited boy was especially dear to her. She always dreamed of some special destiny for him, and of course it was hardly possible to find this fate here, in their native, albeit in a fairly large and prosperous village. Therefore, she willingly supported her son when he announced his desire to study and live in the city after school. After working at the plant for many years, Barbara and Ben, as Andrew's father was called, saved enough to buy their son a small but quite decent apartment. Andrew graduated from college, received an engineering degree, and got a job. Barbara's appearance suited her character, tall, with large features, which almost always had an expression of determination and confidence in her rightness. With all her appearance, she seemed to be saying to those around her, so it's like this. Point 1, I'm right. Point 2, if I'm wrong. Look at point 1, Barbara had a rather full and wide figure. But in some amazing way, all this did not give the impression of excess weight, but seemed to be a manifestation of strength, solidity. All that remained was to add to this a loud, well-produced voice, from which the repairmen, taken by surprise, dropped their wrenches on the floor. It was precisely such a remarkable lady in every sense of the word that Kristen was destined to like. And yet this village iron businesswoman had one weak point. She loved her husband Ben very much. And this love was mutual. They have been together for more than 30 years. They have gone through difficulties, illnesses, the birth of children, joys and sorrows. And yet they retained some kind of reverent, tender feeling for each other, more likely to be characteristic of a young boy and girl than of 50-year-old parents of 4 children who have begun to turn gray. Ben worked as a chief mechanic at the same plant. He and his wife were jokingly called the Black Mafia. But at the same time, absolutely everyone recognized that both Barbara and Ben took their places completely deservedly and fairly. Ben has long gotten used to his wife's difficult character. I learned to adapt to him, and if necessary, to tame Barbara's temper. She heard only him when it seemed impossible to reach her. She recognized the unconditional authority of her husband, and although she could not deny herself the pleasure of arguing and defending her point of view, she certainly took her husband's opinion into account. Kristen enjoyed her openly appraising gaze and smiled. The smile turned out pitiful and forced. Hello, she didn't say, she rather squeaked. In response, she heard, hello, hello, dear guests. Finally, you brought your mysterious stranger to us. Hello, Kristen. Come in. You're welcome. A short, gray-haired man with kind eyes stepped forward. He was very similar to Andrew. He smiled warmly and welcomingly, and Kristen immediately became much calmer. Oh, Andrew looks like him, Kristen finally realized. So this is his dad. My dear son. Finally, he deigned to come and check on us. Barbara finally opened her lips, decisively pushed her husband away, and, as if not noticing Kristen standing next to her, hugged Andrew. Mom, meet me. This is Kristen, he said when he was finally able to emerge from his mother's strong embrace. That's what I understood, said the woman with the face of a queen. Well, let me look at you. Kristen felt that this look was literally breaking her into molecules. Judging by the expression on her face, Barbara didn't particularly like what she saw. True, there were no comments from her. She just took a deep breath. With the rest of the family, everything went much easier and simpler. For the most part, people were friendly and talked with the girl sincerely and with pleasure. She learned many facts about his childhood and youth, and heard somewhat humorous warnings that Andrew was a womanizer. I got acquainted with photographs where he was a baby, still an infant, and sat without clothes, without anything at all. In general, everything was quite fun and positive, if not for the periodically felt glance of Barbara. Then there was a long, plentiful feast, during which they tried to cram a year's worth of food into Kristen. Oh, how great, suddenly one of the sisters exclaimed, snatching a napkin from under Kristen's hand. Kristen did not notice how he sketched a portrait of one of the aunts sitting opposite on a piece of paper. These are living people. Look. Oh, and you're an artist. And draw me. Please. Kristen spent the rest of the evening drawing pictures of those present and receiving admiring reviews. Finally, the endless day came to an end. But okay, that's enough. Let's finish this gathering. Let's all go home. Tomorrow is a hard day. Get up early and get to work, said Barbara. For what work? Andrew asked in surprise. Tomorrow is Sunday. Wait, I thought we would go to the lake, show Kristen our forest, apiary, and generally take a walk, go to a barbecue. How is it? For what work? What barbecue and lake? The mother looked angrily at her son. As far as I can see, you have become quite a city person. You don't think or remember anything at all. We'll dig potatoes tomorrow, Andrew. Well, Mom, what kind of potatoes? We've come to visit. So what? Now will you order us to die of hunger in the winter because of this? We, son, have our own schedule. We have no time for rest now. No, of course, no one is forcing you. Helping us is up to you. Please go for a walk and eat our kebabs. And we have things to do. The woman, looking offended, rose from the table and left the room. For some reason, Kristen's ears lit up. Of course, we must help. True, I have never dug potatoes, but I think it's not that difficult. I'll handle it. She showed a playful look of fear on her face. Kristen, what do you mean help? There's work there all day. Dad, he turned to his father. But I completely forgot about these damn potatoes. You could have warned me. I wouldn't have brought IRA with me. If I came alone, I would bring her next time. Andrew looked at his father reproachfully. Yes, to be honest, I forgot about this damn harvest. I just don't understand why you're so upset. Well, really, as a child, you don't know your mother, do you? Don't pay attention, Ben waved his hand. Well, of course, don't pay attention. When my mother accused me of parasitism in front of everyone, this meat won't go down my throat now. Kristen is hooked. Well, if so, then go with all of us, work there for an hour, and then take my car and leave from there. The father winked at his son, and at the same time his face suddenly looked younger and became somehow boyish. At this moment, father and son were especially similar to each other. Early in the morning, the whole family in several cars was ready to leave. You are going? Well, that's good, son. Barbara looked at her son with a smile, again pretending not to notice Kristen standing next to her. The girl involuntarily noted this. We really need extra male hands. My father is not going. He was urgently called to the plant. We have a serious breakdown there, but he left you the car and said that you agreed on this. For what? Unclear. Barbara shrugged. Andrew winked at Kristen, put his arm around her shoulders and led her to the car. After a few hours spent in the field, Kristen began to feel as if she had always been here and had never seen anything in her life, and would never see anything again, except brown, yellowish and red tubers. By the second break, everything hurt her neck, back, legs, knees, which endlessly bent and unbent, even her fingers, each joint of which throbbed painfully. But she tried not to show it, and, overcoming the ache in her lower back, courageously carried the buckets, which seemed increasingly heavier. Andrew, why do you need so many potatoes? Kristen asked in a whisper, sadly looking around the huge fields and realizing that he couldn't see the edge or end. Listen, to be honest, I never understood this myself. Please forgive me for these damn potatoes. This is just some kind of setup. Come on, it's okay, she muttered, pouring another portion of the Black family's strategic food supply into the pile. Come on, let's go, Andrew begged her several times. My father left me a car. We'll just leave. Nobody will notice. Nobody will notice. Nobody. Your mother? Kristen asked ironically. Well, Mom, of course, will notice. The guy laughed. Of course he will notice, Kristen thought to herself. She just watches me. Without stopping, sooner or later everything ends. Even what seemed endless. The damn potato field is over. Well, city people, thank you for any help, said Barbara. We could manage, of course. Mom, stop it. Andrew stopped his mother, who seemed to be able to explain to Kristen that no one really needed her help, and it was stupid to expect gratitude from her. Why do you rush to her defense all the time, like a cat to a chicken? Honestly, it's downright funny. Am I some kind of monster? Barbara suddenly became offended. Go help me load the shovels into the car, otherwise we'll forget them on the field again, as always. And Kristen and I will stand here and finally talk about our own things. About women's things. Andrew looked at the women uncertainly, and noticing that Kristen nodded, slowly walked towards the car. Well, okay. Now let's get serious, Barbara said after a very long pause. So long that Kristen managed to calm down, get scared, and come to her senses again. Tell me this, Kristen. Barbara reluctantly said the girl's name. You and my son have a serious relationship. Well, are you planning to marry him? To be honest, Barbara, he didn't ask me to marry. For now, anyway. Kristen decided to be brave and looked directly into the eyes of her opponent. But if he calls, I will consider this offer very seriously. You'll think about it. Are you still going to think? Judging by the indignation, Barbara did not appreciate the irony and was sincerely indignant. Look, she's still getting ready to think. What about you yourself? Such a big jewel? I am not a very profitable party at all. Or rather, completely unprofitable, Kristen tried to joke. But the woman did not take this as playful irony. Vice versa. It's very good that you understand this yourself, and you should always remember it. After all, apparently you have nothing. Housing, for example. Yes, I live with my mother, and unfortunately I don't expect an inheritance from anywhere. But I believe in miracles. You never know. Kristen kept trying to soften Andrew's mother, make her laugh, and remove anger and tension from their communication. But she understood everything wrong. But I immediately realized that you were not very well brought up. You don't have to demonstrate this again. I take it you don't have a profession either. Why not? I actually finished school. I tried to defend myself, Kristen. I have a diploma as an artist teacher, by the way, with honors. Well, what kind of profession is this? Draftsman. Honors. Do not make me laugh. I have a younger niece, and she can draw. Well, maybe a little worse than you. So what? How are you going to make a living? Or are you planning to sit on our necks? I don't dare Kristen to sit on your neck, Barbara. Kristen said quietly. And in general, I would like to tell you. If not for us, then for my son. The woman continued, as if not noticing Kristen's words. That is, Andrew will work for you too, and you will draw pictures. Is this how you see your family life? But nothing will work out for you. Don't move. Listen, I won't say it again. If you want to marry my son, get a normal profession. Do you hear? Barbara turned around without warning and quickly walked away. Kristen looked after her silently. Well? Andrew asked with obvious concern. How did you communicate? Yes, we talked. Everyone and my father really liked you. And Mom too. She just told me you have a good girl. Wait and see. Imagine. On the way back, Kristen thought so deeply about everything that had been said that she even stopped feeling pain in her muscles. Or maybe Andrew's mother is right. After all, she is an intelligent, experienced woman. She has achieved everything herself, and she runs such a business. And at home, everything is on track with her. Well, in fact, she, Kristen, cannot feed herself even on her salary. How can she count on a normal family? After all, it turns out that she is some kind of freeloader. Returning to the city, Kristen rushed to find out information about advanced training courses and other ways to obtain additional education. A few days after their return, Andrew spoke with a serious face. Have you thought about studying somewhere else? And I was talking to my mother. She says accountants are needed everywhere now. I don't know how to do it correctly, but in general, you can easily find a job. She even has a friend here in our city. They will hire you without experience. You just need to complete special courses. Kristen looked at Andrew carefully. He understood this look and spoke. Kristen, you understand, Mother won't give us peace anyway. And if you do as she advises, everything will be fine. I didn't tell you my court Kristen as well. Not really my court Kristen. Well, or rather, in fact, of course it's mine, but it's registered to my mother. We have to live there with you. If we decide, Kristen, for my sake. Okay, I'm ready to do anything for you and become anyone, be it a witch or an accountant. I just don't know if I can do it. You see, it will work, he exclaimed confidently. Of course it will work. Everyone can do it. But I'm not everything. I want to do something completely different, I wanted to shout to Kristen, but she remained silent. A few months later, Kristen was working for a large food retail company. She and about 15 other people sat in a huge windowless room, more like a warehouse than an office, and printed an endless document, according to which they then collected and released goods. She now earned almost twice as much as at art school. But there was no talk of any joy or pleasure from work. Kristen felt like a tiny cog in a huge machine, so small and insignificant that even if it falls out, disappears, no one will notice. Kristen, it is you. She heard it once in a big store. Turning around, she saw her old school teacher. He smiled widely. Lord, how glad I am to see you. Well, tell me, how are you doing? Hello. Yes, I live like everyone else. Normally I work. Got married, almost. This is of course wonderful. Congratulations, congratulations. Well, what about creativity, right? I'm still waiting. Maybe you could invite the old man to an exhibition of your works. Drawing is difficult now. Not yet. How so? Are you really not writing at all? It hurts. It's a shame because you have talent. And Kristen, a real talent. Yes, it's a pity. It's a pity. Unfortunately, I still remember your sketches." "How so?" "That's how life turned out." Kristen answered dryly, seeing how the old teacher was lamenting. She, feeling regret, suddenly became offended at him, at herself, at the whole world. She was offended and angry. "You see, I need to live on something. It's a pity that the school doesn't teach a course called 'How Can an Aspiring Artist Avoid Starving to Death?' It would be very useful, you know." The old man was taken aback, looked sadly at Kristen and sighed. "Well, I was glad to see you." "Glad. I wish all the best." He bowed slightly in the old-fashioned manner and walked away. Kristen and Andrew lived in his apartment. A year later, Kristen gave birth to a boy who was named Ted. They never had a wedding. It's just that for some reason neither Kristen nor Andrew talked about it. And then there was no time for that at all. At 2 years old, the baby was diagnosed with heart failure. Kristen's whole life was completely devoted to her son, just as her mother's life had once been dedicated to her. But only if Mom was completely alone, then her beloved man lived in the same apartment with Kristen. At first, despite Ted's illness, she was happy. In any case, she herself was convinced of this. Andrew was caring and gentle. He tried to be at home more often and play with his son. But gradually, at first almost imperceptibly, in some isolated tiny moments, and then more and more often and clearly, something began to happen that meant the end of their family happiness. Andrew began to sometimes delay returning home, at first occasionally and not for long, but gradually more and more often. "Kristen, hello. Listen, there's a lot of work. Don't lose me." Okay, she heard it periodically on the telephone receiver. Then came car breakdowns with visits to the workshop, meeting a friend from the plane, a dentist, urgent trips to see his parents. Kristen and Ted were increasingly alone. Andrew gradually became completely different. A wall grew inexorably between him and Kristen. Kristen was afraid to admit this to herself and stubbornly continued to convince herself that everything in her life was good, and that there were minor problems and troubles in every family. At the same time at work, year after year, she did what she did not like and did not understand. The computer and the numbers in the documents gave me headaches and eyes, and the boredom that overwhelmed her in the office was sometimes unbearable. All the old albums, folders with sketches and sketches, once unfinished canvas paintings, everything that was once so dear to her, was her joy, her essence, was collecting dust in her mother's old closed apartment. Anne herself passed away 2 years ago, just as quietly and unnoticed by others as she lived. And the sadness for my mother was also quiet, muted, light. Kristen sometimes came to the small apartment, which now became her apartment. She looked through her works, and she had the feeling that she was looking at her past, covered in dust, but still beautiful. And I didn't want to return to the present at all. In the present, she lived some kind of life that was not her own, an incomprehensible, uninteresting, unnecessary life. Relations with my friend Helen were essentially reduced to telephone conversations, which became less and less frequent. Helen, in her usual straightforward manner, scolded Kristen that she was doing something she didn't like and had completely given up drawing, locked herself at home, and saw nothing but a completely idiotic job, as a friend put it. "You live as if under a stick, but look at yourself, you look like, I don't know, a young old woman." Ted, meanwhile, turned 5 years old. Andrew sometimes spent the evenings at home, but they hardly spoke. He sat at the computer or spent time on the loggia with a mobile phone in his hand. Kristen began to involuntarily notice that when she appeared, he tried to minimize the screen on the monitor or turn off the device, or end the conversation. Andrew's phone, which was usually lying around wherever possible, always forgotten by its owner in the most unexpected places, was now always either in his hands or in his pocket. Kristen wandered around the apartment like a ghost, studied with Ted, put him to bed, and went to bed herself. Then she lay for a long time, listening to Andrew settling down for the night in the next room. "We need to talk." She finally decided to break the unbearable silence at home. "Tell me honestly, do you have someone?" He looked at Kristen. Actually, she no longer needed an answer spoken out loud. "What happened to us?" she asked Andrew. "After all, once upon a time everything was so good with us. You loved me, I loved you. Life was wonderful. What has changed? Why have we changed so much? You are the one who has changed, and I'm no longer interested in you. And then, let's be honest, I never told you that I love you. Did I like you? Yes, very. You were so unusual, not like everyone else, different in everything." And then she turned into some kind of gray mouse. But it's you. You forced me to become different, forced me to change, to leave everything I loved, quit my favorite thing. You. You know, my mother warned me that you would blame us for everything. And so it happened. What did you leave there? What's the matter? You'd think you could be a great artist. Nothing would have come of you anyway. Well, at most I would draw pictures for advertising signs. Kristen closed her eyes tiredly. How right Helen was when she said that she, Kristen, sold herself. And now she is paying for this betrayal. If you expect to get something from me, you are in vain. We are not registered, and you have no rights to my property. Of course you will move out of the apartment. Ted. Kristen looked at the man in panic. He saw this look, and something similar to shame flashed in his eyes. Ted, of course, will live with you. Andrew said embarrassedly. I'm not a bastard to take Kristen away from the child's mother. He seemed to have recovered from his momentary weakness, cast aside his conscience, and continued. And about alimony, keep in mind that I don't officially work. There's nothing special to take from me. If you try to sue me. Andrew, tell me honestly, Kristen, sitting comfortably on a kitchen stool, put her hands on the table and rested her chin on her fists. Did your mother write the words for this speech? What other words? What does this have to do with Mom? He was nervous. Her behavior infuriated him. She didn't make a fuss, didn't cry, didn't beg him for anything. She simply looked at him with her attentive gaze, as if noticing all the details for the future portrait. These are not your thoughts. You can't be that scoundrel. I don't believe. But don't be afraid. In any case, I don't need anything from you. Kristen said, looking at Andrew with sad regret. Everything I need is already with me. What is this? He became wary. What do you mean? Ted, Kristen said calmly. And myself, the real one. The former one, I forgot, Kristen, you. It's just something you don't need. Kristen took Ted's things and went to her old apartment. A few days later, she realized that there was no trace left of her loneliness. She was herself again, the mistress of her life, and paintings and drawings like old friends supported her. With the new job, everything happened completely by accident. Lena, with whom Kristen again communicated, as in the old days, often easily and directly, without choosing Kristen, I had the time and mood, giving themselves to each other and not expecting anything in return, as true friends should communicate, had a birthday. Helen, my dear, happy birthday. Kristen hugged her friend and entered the large living room. She's been here many times. She liked the spacious, bright room with a minimal amount of furniture and a huge shaggy carpet in the center. But today something was wrong. Something was terribly in the way, creating severe discomfort. Kristen looked carefully at the living room and realized exactly what it was: a huge, bright, but surprisingly tasteless flower bouquet standing on the table. It was composed of chic, unusual flowers and greenery, but it gave the impression of some kind of expensive bad taste. Kristen tried not to pay attention to him, but her artistic taste violently protested. No, I'm sorry, but I can't do this, Helen. It's terrible. Where did you get this terrible bouquet? There is no composition, the colors simply oppress each other. Can I correct it a little? This here is completely unnecessary. That's better, right? Well, wait a minute. Helen suddenly stared at her friend. Exactly, I came up with it. This is brilliant, what you need. Listen, I have a client. We are working on a contract with her. FIFA, you know, is all about itself. By the way, she gave me this bouquet. She has several flower shops with a pretense of sophistication. The prices for flowers there are simply terrible. When I looked at one of her contracts with suppliers, I thought that, judging by the figures, she was selling imported medicines. Well, you know, these flowers have a name that will break your tongue. So she complained that she did not have decent bouquet makers. Like them, Helen recalled the right word with a snap of her fingers: florists. Well, what do I have to do with it? Kristen shrugged. I'm not a florist. But you are an artist. Who, if not you, should know what is beautiful and what is not? Exactly. I'll talk to her, we'll send you to courses and start working. You know, Helen, I've had enough courses. I tried to resist Kristen, but Helen, who had gained momentum, was not easy to stop. The new case has taken over Kristen completely. Finally, she again plunged into the beauty of paint, the form of her imagination. Each flower was a separate work of art for her, and those collected together were her personal works. It was as if she was painting human feelings and emotions with colors. She wrote with inspiration, boldly telling stories of love, gratitude, tenderness, and determination with each bouquet. Of course, she, or rather her composition, has regular customers and fans. People sometimes just came to look, admire, and feel the harmony. You know, Kristen, it looks like we need to make a personal showcase for your work, the business owner remarked, smiling. Among her regular clients, Kristen soon began to single out one who periodically went to the flower salon. He was a rather tall, thin man with a small gray beard and hair. He wore thin glasses with gold frames, and all this made his face somehow not modern, as if from the last century. Interesting person. Kristen quietly pointed at him with her eyes to her partner. Someone not from here, as if he appeared from the last century. It will stand for a short time and disappear again. It won't disappear. A girl named Alice answered ironically. He lives quite well in the present. Be calm. Don't you know who it is? Wow, this is George. Well, the same one who runs the car plant. They say he can buy and sell our entire city. He visited us regularly. He has an office nearby, that huge building on the corner. A strange man, he will stand at the display window and stand there, sigh and smile. Maybe he's sick? Well, the rich have their own quirks. Alice was clearly not against continuing the conversation about the visitor, who was interesting in every sense. But Kristen could not stand gossip, and nodding to Alice, stepped aside. Tell me, please. Kristen heard a quiet voice, sounding clear but soft. This is what people say who don't need to be listened to, because everyone already shuts up when they want to say something. Can I talk to the person who compiled them? Yes, please. It's me. Kristen smiled lightly and looked into his eyes. Do you want to buy them? No, I mean yes, or rather he adjusted his glasses. Actually, I would like something like that. No, these are also beautiful, but for me they are too bright, you know. I would like something, how to put it. He fell silent, looking for the right word. Calm down, apparently she suggested. Yes, it's definitely calmer, exactly, the man rejoiced. A very precise word. How did you pick it up? It's not me. This is the theory of artistic art, well-known terminology, answered by Kristen. So you need a calm, warm monochrome? For whom? Can you provide some details? For a woman 56 years old. 3 grandchildren, financier, blonde. He encouraged Kristen's words, taking short pauses between them, and smiled, as if appreciating a new interesting game. Well, I'll try. Kristen smiled in response. This is simply amazing. Each of your bouquets is like, I don't know, like a canvas, a painting. Yes, that's exactly the picture. The man looked admiringly at the bouquet compiled before his eyes. You're just an artist, Kristen, he added, looking at her badge. I'm glad you like it, she said with a slight bow. Like very much. I'm sure the recipient will be absolutely delighted. Thank you, maestro. He carefully took the large bouquet and walked towards the exit of the salon. He came into the salon quite often. Too often for a man and a businessman. This was quite unusual. One day, while selling him the 3rd bouquet in a week, Kristen looked up at him with a smile. You buy flowers so often, she decided to notice. You obviously have many reasons for this. Do you really need a reason to give flowers? I just like to give flowers, he replied, with or without reason. You know, it's like taking colored pencils and coloring a gray sheet. Kristen looked at the man suspiciously, trying to determine if he was mocking her. He uttered very unusual, strange words for a man, especially one who was considered one of the unofficial masters of the city. Flowers are beautiful, and there should be many of them in life. It's true? That's what everyone thinks, don't they? But many people probably think so. But to put these thoughts into practice, frankly speaking, you are the first person on my path who does this. Kristen laughed. Besides, he continued, your salon is very conveniently located between the house where I live and my office building, so we can assume that I come to you on the way home or to work. Well, the last argument is why I began to come here much more often than before. He looked carefully at Kristen. I assume you know it's your work and you. The last words were added very quietly. Kristen flushed, lowered her head, and pretended she hadn't heard, depicting extreme busyness. You know, Kristen, your works still have one big drawback. Kristen raised her head in surprise. Yes, and this flaw migrates from one of your jobs to another. They are all beautiful, but short-lived, alas. And sometimes I want your bouquet to stay with me forever. This one, for example. Do you want me to do it? Would you like me to draw it for you? Suddenly suggested Kristen, who suddenly wanted to pick up brushes and paints until her fingers trembled and she cried. 3 years have passed. On a wonderful May morning, Kristen got up very early and still realized with fear that she was unlikely to have time to do everything that was planned. Today is the day of a grand event that she has dreamed of all her life. Just yesterday she was pleased with how everything was organized, but in the morning she suddenly realized with horror that she needed to change the position of the paintings and put on additional light. On the contrary, several huge windows need to be covered. You definitely need to remove the last 2 pictures. Still, it was not for nothing that she felt that they were not ready yet. Everything had to be perfect, and for this, a lot more needed to be done. It was necessary to call a dozen places, coordinate a huge number of little things, which as usual, came out at the last moment. Despite the fact that today's entire event had been carefully planned and prepared for a long time, it was organized by the best specialists, and yet, it was her business, her life. And only she knew how everything should really be. Today, a personal exhibition Kristen opened at the Central Art Gallery of the city. As experts wrote about her, she is one of the most talented and promising artists of recent times. Well, are you ready for world fame? A huge bouquet of wet, half-bloomed peonies, probably consisting of at least 100 flowers, cautiously entered the room. The bouquet had man's legs. The immense bunch of flowers moved slightly, and from behind it appeared a thin face with a beard and glasses with thin gold frames sitting on his nose. No, I'm not ready, Kristen laughed, feeling her anxiety, worry, and excitement disappear like smoke. She came up and hugged the bouquet, which the man continued to hold in his hands on the other side. Then she moved the delicate, subtly fresh-smelling buds and kissed the cheek that appeared. Kristen, he whispered, I love you and am very proud of you. I love you very much too, George. Thanks for all. A few hours later, Kristen, in a stunning dress, accepted congratulations on the resounding success of her exhibition. A little to the side, squinting in pleasure in the bright light, stood George, her husband, the man thanks to whom her dream became possible. The man who loved her for who she was. After an endless reception, the couple finally got ready to go home and got into the car. Kristen, she suddenly heard. A man in a driver's uniform stood a little to the side. He had a baseball cap on his head. The face was in shadow, but in the figure, in the pose, in the manner of holding her right hand a little back, Kristen felt something very familiar. She looked closely, and a light, sad, barely noticeable smile touched her lips. Wait a minute. Okay? She said in the direction of George, who was already sitting in the car behind the wheel and moved towards the one who was standing. Andrew, she didn't ask, she said affirmatively. Hello. Hello, he answered hoarsely. I hardly recognized you, but I still recognized you. Well, congratulations. So you achieved your goal, you became queen. He grinned wryly and said, Andrew. No, I just became myself, Kristen smiled.